Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash saved Dawn from Team Galactic and she refused to leave his side forever. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Vow on the Pillar. The world was screaming. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, but one that vibrated in the bone, in the teeth, in the very soul. At the apex of Mount Coronet, on the ancient stone platform of the spear pillar, reality itself was coming apart at the seams. Above them, the sky was no longer sky. It was a swirling vortex of impossible colors, bruised purples, sickly greens, and fissures of blinding white light that split the heavens like cracks in porcelain. At the center of it all, suspended in the violent air, were the two titans of Sinnoh mythology, brought forth against their will. Dialga, whose roar was the grinding of time itself, its diamond chestplate pulsing with a furious, trapped energy. Palkia, whose shriek was the tearing of space, the pearls on its shoulders glowing with a volatile, pinkish light. Binding them, forcing their proximity, was the source of the catastrophe, the red chain. Two links of crimson energy, forged from the lake trio, pulsed with a malevolent power, holding the gods of time and space in a cosmic stranglehold. It's not working. Dawn's voice was a thin, desperate thread against the dimensional gale. Her blue hair, usually so carefully styled, was a wild tangle whipping across her face. She clung to a weathered stone pillar, her knuckles white. Piplup was braced at her feet, its small body trembling as it fired a defiant bubble beam into the chaos, the bubbles popping harmlessly against the shimmering psychic barrier around the madman responsible. Cyrus, the leader of Team Galactic, stood on a raised dais, his arms thrown wide in triumph. His face was a mask of ecstatic madness, his gray eyes fixed on the new universe he believed he was birthing. It is working. Can't you feel it? The friction of two worlds. My new world, a world without spirit, being born from the ashes of your flawed, emotional one. Pikachu, use Thunderbolt, full power. Ash Ketchum roared, his voice raw. He stood his ground, legs braced, his hat long since lost to the vortex. Pikachu. A bolt of lightning, thicker and more brilliant than any Pikachu had ever summoned, speared across the dais. It didn't just crackle, it screamed, tearing through the distorted air. But as it neared Cyrus, the space before him seemed to bend, to warp like heated glass, and the colossal thunderbolt veered off course, slamming into a far-off cliff face and blowing tons of rock into dust. Palkia let out another agonized cry, and the ground beneath their feet shifted, one section of the spear pillar dropping a full 2 feet with a sickening lurch. Brock, ever the anchor, grabbed Ash's arm to steady him. His control over them is getting stronger. That spatial warp wasn't from Palkia, it was from the red chain itself. We have to break the chain. Ash yelled, pointing with a trembling hand. It's the only way. They had tried. For what felt like an eternity, their Pokémon had thrown every attack they had at the glowing crimson lynx. Staraptor's brave bird, Infernape's flare blitz, Bizel's aqua jet, all had dissipated against the chain's impossible energy. It was like trying to punch a ghost. There's no breaking it. Cyrus laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. It is a law of the new reality. The law that I have written. As if to punctuate his statement, Dialga bellowed, a wave of temporal energy washing over the battlefield. For a horrifying second, Ash saw his own hand age, withering into a skeletal claw before snapping back to normal. He saw Dawn flicker, a ghostly afterimage of her as a small child standing beside her for a split second. The mountain groaned, ancient stones. Turning to dust and then reforming. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was an apocalypse in miniature. Piplup, hang in there. Dawn cried, seeing her partner stagger as another spatial wave distorted the ground, making it ripple like water. She took a step forward, her focus entirely on her Pokémon, her footing uncertain on the violently shuddering stone. That was when it happened. It started not with a bang, but with a tear. A sound like ripping fabric, magnified 1,000,000 times. To the left of Cyrus, a few feet from where Dawn was moving, the air simply broke. It wasn't a portal of color like the one above. It was a patch of utter, complete nothingness. A hole in the world. It didn't lead anywhere, it was an endpoint. A void that began to pull at everything around it with a silent, hungry force. Loose pebbles skittered across the ground and vanished into the blackness. The air itself seemed to drain away, creating a low, moaning wind that was the sound of existence being unmade. Dawn felt the pull first. It was gentle at first, like a persistent breeze. Then it became a physical hand, yanking at her coat, her hair, her very being. She cried out, stumbling, her boots sliding on the stone. Dawn! Ash and Brock yelled in unison. The pull intensified. She was leaning at a 45-degree angle, her feet scrabbling for purchase. Piplup tried to grab her leg with its flippers, but the tiny Pokémon was also being dragged, its claws making screeching sounds on the rock. Dawn's eyes were wide with a terror so pure it stole her breath. She saw the edge of the void, the way the stone of the spear pillar simply ceased to be, and she knew, with a certainty that froze her blood, that if she went in, she wouldn't just die. She would be erased. Ash didn't think. He didn't strategize. He didn't call out an order. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, honed by years of throwing himself in front of danger for his friends and his Pokémon, coalesced into a single, explosive movement. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He was already sprinting, his legs pumping with a strength born of pure adrenaline. The world seemed to slow, the roar of the gods fading into a dull hum. He saw the individual strands of Dawn's hair straining toward the void. He saw the panicked look in Piplup's eyes. He saw the exact moment her left foot lost its grip completely. He was never going to make it. Not to grab her. Not to pull her back. So he changed his trajectory. One final, desperate push of his legs, and he launched himself forward, not at her, but past her. He slammed into her side with his shoulder, a rough, brutal shove that was the most desperate and caring act of his life. Ash, she screamed, her terror for herself instantly replaced by terror for him as she was thrown violently sideways, tumbling onto the hard stone floor, safe and away from the rift's edge. Ash's momentum carried him into the space she had just occupied. For a fraction of a second, he was suspended at the precipice. He felt the void's pull, a cold, absolute emptiness that promised oblivion. He saw Pikachu, its face a mask of horror, lunging for him. He met Dawn's wide, terrified eyes, and in that fragment of a moment, a strange sense of calm washed over him. It was okay. She was safe. Then, everything changed. Perhaps it was his sudden proximity to the spatial tear. Perhaps it was the sheer emotional overload of the moment, his desperation, Dawn's terror, the fury of the gods. Perhaps it was fate. Whatever the cause, his body, saturated with the raw emotional energy he shared with his Pokémon, became a lightning rod. The red chain, already strained to its breaking point by the conflicting powers of time and space, could not withstand this new, focused anomaly. With a sound that was both a deafening crack and an absolute silence, the two links of the red chain shattered. But the energy didn't just dissipate. It had to go somewhere. A torrent of incandescent power, a river of raw cosmic force, was unleashed. From Dialga, a stream of crackling, crystalline blue light, the essence of time itself. From Palkia, a flood of shimmering, liquid pink energy, the fabric of space. The two streams, meant to be opposite forces, converged. And Ash was at the epicenter. He didn't even have time to scream. The combined power slammed into him, not as a physical force, but as an absolute state of being. The world dissolved into a storm of pure, white light. He felt himself being torn apart and rebuilt, atom by atom, 1,000,000,000 times a second. He experienced the birth of the universe and its final, cold death in the same instant. He felt his consciousness expand, touching every point in space and time simultaneously. He was everywhere and everywhen. He was everything and nothing. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The silence on the spear pillar was more shocking than the noise had been. The vortex in the sky was gone. The impossible colors had faded, leaving behind the crisp, cold blue of the mountain peaks' heavens. The dimensional rift, the hole in the world, had vanished as if it had never been. Freed from their bonds, Dialga and Palkia hovered for a moment, their rage subsiding into a weary, ancient majesty. They turned their great heads, not toward Cyrus, who was now crumpled on the ground amidst the wreckage of his ambition, but towards the spot where Ash stood. Dawn pushed herself up, her body bruised and aching. "Ash," she whispered, her voice trembling. He was standing in the center of the dais, perfectly still. The dust and energy motes of the recent cataclysm swirled around him, but none seemed to touch him. He was preternaturally calm, his posture relaxed, his head slightly bowed. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes, normally a warm, vibrant brown, were now glowing. His right eye shone with the soft, ethereal pink of Palkia's pearl. His left glowed with the sharp, crystalline blue of Dialga's diamond. The glow wasn't aggressive, it was a steady, internal luminescence, like twin galaxies swirling in the depths of his gaze. Dialga let out a low, resonant rumble. It wasn't a roar of anger, but a sound of acknowledgement. Palkia tilted its head, its own gaze fixed on Ash. For a long, silent moment, the boy and the two gods simply looked at one another. No words were exchanged, but an entire library of information, of understanding, of grim necessity, seemed to pass between them. It was a transfer of a burden. A silent, solemn pact. Then, with a grace that defied their immense size, the two deities turned. Palkia swiped its arm, tearing a gentle, shimmering portal in the air, and both stepped through, vanishing from the mortal plane. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken pillars. Ash. Dawn scrambled to her feet and ran towards him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Brock was right behind her, his face a mixture of awe and profound concern. "Ash, are you okay? What happened?" Dawn reached him, her hand outstretched. The moment her fingers brushed against the sleeve of his jacket, a jolt went through her, sharp and electric but not painful. It was a sensation of pure, undiluted rightness. The chaos of the past hour, the fear, the bone-deep vibration of a world breaking, it all vanished, replaced by a profound sense of peace and safety that radiated from him like warmth from a fire. The world, which had felt gray and muted with lingering terror, suddenly snapped back into focus, the colors seeming richer, the air cleaner. It was as if she had been living with a constant, low-level static her whole life and had only just now experienced true silence. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight, needing to hold on to that feeling, that anchor. "Ash," she said again, her voice softer now. He looked down at her, and the intensity in his mismatched eyes softened. The glow receded slightly, becoming less a declaration and more a quiet hum. A small, faint smile touched his lips. It was his smile, but it was different. Calmer. Wiser. "I'm okay, Dawn," he said. His voice was the same, but the frantic energy that usually underpinned it was gone, replaced by a deep, steady resonance. "It's over." Pikachu, who had been frozen in place, finally shook itself and scrambled up its trainer's leg, chirping with frantic worry. Ash raised a hand and gently stroked the yellow Pokémon's head. "It's all right, buddy," he murmured. "We're all safe." Pikachu leaned into his touch, and for a moment, the yellow fur around Ash's fingertips seemed to crackle not just with electricity, but with tiny, spatial distortions, like miniature heat hazes. It was at that moment that a new sound reached them, the powerful downdraft of helicopter blades. No, not a helicopter. A dragon. Cynthia's Garchomp landed with a ground-shaking thud on the edge of the pillar, its rider dismounting with practiced ease. The Sinnoh champion's long blonde hair was windswept, and her face was grim as she took in the scene of utter devastation. Her gaze swept over the broken pillars, the unconscious form of Cyrus, and finally landed on the three trainers standing in the middle of it all. Her professional, stoic expression faltered when she saw Ash. She saw his eyes. She felt it, too, a subtle but undeniable wrongness in the air around him, a density to the space he occupied. "What, in Arceus's name, happened here?" she breathed, striding forward, her long black coat billowing behind her. Brock stepped forward to explain, his voice urgent and strained, recounting the summoning, the red chain, the void, and Ash's sacrifice. As he spoke, Cynthia's gaze remained locked on Ash. She was a scholar as much as a champion, and she recognized the energy signatures she was feeling, however faint. Time. Space. Woven together in a pattern that should not, could not, exist within a human being. When Brock finished, silence fell again. Cynthia took a deep, steadying breath, her mind racing through 1,000 terrifying implications. "Ash," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "We need to get you to Canalave City. Immediately. We have experts, scientists, they need to examine you. We need to understand what that energy did to you." It was the logical thing to say. The responsible thing. But as soon as the words left her mouth, Dawn's grip on Ash's arm tightened. The sense of peace she felt from him was a beacon, and the thought of being separated from it, of letting him be taken away to be prodded and poked like an experiment, sent a spike of pure, primal panic through her. It was an instinct that bypassed all reason. She stepped forward slightly, placing herself partially in front of Ash, a small, fierce guardian against the champion of the entire region. Her chin was raised, her blue eyes, usually so full of cheer and doubt, were now hard as sapphires. "No," she said. The single word hung in the cold mountain air, sharp and absolute. Cynthia blinked, taken aback. "Dawn, I understand you're concerned, but this is beyond anything we've ever encountered. He could be in incredible danger." "His body," I said. "No," Dawn repeated, her voice gaining strength. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a conviction so powerful it felt like it wasn't entirely her own. She looked from Cynthia's concerned face to Ash's calm one. The connection she felt to him, that tangible, calming presence, was the only thing that made sense in a world that had just stopped screaming. To leave his side now felt like stepping off a cliff. It felt like walking back into that void. She turned her head, looking up at Ash, her eyes pleading, promising, and declaring all at once. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, meant for him alone. Then, she faced Cynthia again, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. "I'm not leaving him," she declared, her voice ringing out across the stone pillar with the force of a sacred oath. "Ever." Brock stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had known Dawn for a long time. He'd seen her determined, seen her upset, seen her confident. He had never seen her like this. This was a different kind of strength, absolute and immovable. Cynthia's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in sharp analysis. She saw Dawn's stance, the fierce protectiveness. She saw Ash's quiet acceptance of it. She saw the way he placed his free hand over hers on his arm, a silent affirmation. And she saw the faint, otherworldly glow in his eyes. He wasn't just Ash Ketchum anymore. And Dawn wasn't just his friend. Something fundamental had happened here, something that tied them together. Ash finally spoke, his voice carrying a new, quiet authority that made even the champion pause. He looked directly at Cynthia, his gaze level and clear. "She's right. I can't go with you." "Ash, be reasonable," Cynthia insisted, taking a step closer. "You don't know what's happening to you." "I don't know. But the people who took Cyrus into custody will have detected the energy release. Every government, every shady organization with the right equipment just saw a flare go up on this mountain. They will come looking for the source. They will come looking for you. You'll be hunted. The safest place for you is under my protection. Ash's expression didn't change. The calm was unnerving. The boy who would charge headfirst into any situation without a plan was gone. In his place was someone who seemed to see all the angles, all the possibilities, stretching out like roads into the future. Your protection would be a cage, Cynthia, he said, his voice gentle but firm. A comfortable one, but a cage all the same. You think they'd let me walk away after they understand what happened? They'd see me as a weapon. Or a threat. Or both. He glanced down at Dawn, then back at Cynthia. I can't be a weapon. And I won't be a prisoner. A tense silence descended. Brock looked between them, his mind struggling to keep up. Everything had changed in the span of 10 minutes. The friendships, the power dynamics, the future. It was Brock who finally broke the standoff, his voice heavy with resignation. He's right, Cynthia. You know he is. The moment he's in the system, he's no longer a person. He's an asset. Or a danger to be neutralized. He looked at his friends, a deep sadness in his eyes. If they're going to run, they need to run now. Cynthia's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She saw the truth in their words. She knew the kind of people who would be dispatched to investigate an event like this. Men and women who dealt in absolutes, who saw legendaries not as sacred beings, but as alpha-level threats. Ash, now infused with the power of two of them, would be the greatest threat of all. Where will you go? She asked, her voice soft. Ash looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of Sinnoh stretching out below them. His glowing eyes seemed to see something far beyond the mountains and forests. Somewhere they won't find us, he said. It wasn't a guess, it was a statement of fact. He looked at Dawn, a silent question in his eyes. Her answer was the unwavering tightness of her grip on his arm. He then turned to Brock. Brock, you can't come with us. It's too dangerous. They'll be looking for all of us. You have a family, a future as a doctor. You need to go home. Brock opened his mouth to protest, the familiar, loyal instinct to stay by his friend's side rising up. But he stopped. He saw the look in Ash's eyes, not a request, but a command born of friendship. It was a dismissal meant to protect him. Staying with them would mean becoming a fugitive, throwing away everything he'd ever worked for. A painful lump formed in his throat. Yeah, he finally managed, his voice thick. Yeah, I understand. Ash gave him a nod, a world of gratitude and apology passing between them. He then turned back to Cynthia. Buy us some time. Please. Tell them Cyrus's machine malfunctioned. Tell them the energy dissipated. Tell them anything. Cynthia held his gaze for a long moment, the strange, glowing eyes that held the power of gods. She saw the boy she'd mentored, the fierce trainer, the loyal friend. And she saw the new, terrifying, and magnificent being he had become. She made a choice. The red chain created a feedback loop and self-destructed, she said, her voice crisp and official, as if she were already preparing her report. The resulting dimensional instability was temporary. Cyrus is in custody. The situation is contained. She looked at him. I can give you 12 hours. Maybe 24, if I can muddy the waters. After that, you're on your own. Thank you, Ash said simply. He looked at Dawn. Ready? She just nodded, her eyes fixed on his. The world outside their small circle of two didn't matter. Without another word, Ash turned and began to walk, not toward the path down the mountain, but towards a sheer, crumbling cliff edge. Dawn went with him, their steps perfectly in sync, her hand never leaving his arm. Ash, wait. Brock called out, taking a step after them. That's a dead end. Ash didn't stop. He walked to the very edge of the precipice, the wind whipping at his clothes. Below them was a 1,000-foot drop onto jagged rocks. He paused, looked down, and then looked at Dawn. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. For the first time since the event, it looked like his old smile, full of confidence and a hint of recklessness. "Don't worry," he said, his voice carrying easily on the wind. "I have a feeling about this." And with that, he stepped off the cliff, pulling a gasping Dawn with him into the open air. Cynthia and Brock cried out, rushing to the edge, their hearts seizing in their chests. They looked down, expecting to see two falling bodies. But there was nothing. They hadn't fallen. They hadn't vanished in a flash of light. They were just gone. The air where they had been was empty. There was no sound, no distortion, no sign they had ever been there at all. It was as if the space they occupied had simply decided they were no longer in it. Brock stared into the empty air, his hands gripping the cold stone of the cliff edge. Cynthia stood beside him, her face pale, her composure finally shattered. On the highest peak of the Sinnoh region, under the cold, silent watch of the sky, they were left with the devastating aftermath of a battle that had changed the world, and the impossible disappearance of two friends who had just stepped into a new, unknown, and terrifying future. A future where they would be hunted, where they would be feared, and where their only anchor was the unbreakable vow made on the ruins of the spear pillar. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2, Echoes and Hunters. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of living in the spaces between the lines of the world. They slept in abandoned cabins, in the hollows of ancient trees, and once, shivering together for warmth, in a hayloft that smelled of sweet grass and decay. They ate what they could forage and what little they could buy with their dwindling cash in towns small enough not to have a television, let alone a police force that cared about bulletins from the capital. They moved by foot, following game trails and forgotten logging roads, always staying under the dense canopy of Sinnoh's endless forests. The map they had was creased and worn, a silent testament to their meandering, desperate journey. Life on the run was a rhythm of quiet paranoia. Every snapped twig was a potential pursuer. Every distant hum of a vehicle sent them diving for cover. But in this constant state of alert, something new had taken root between Ash and Dawn. The shock and adrenaline of the spear pillar had cooled, leaving behind the strange, fundamental connection that had been forged in the heart of the storm. For Dawn, it was a constant, low-frequency hum at the base of her skull, a presence that was as much a part of her now as her own heartbeat. It was Ash. When he was near, the world felt stable, the colors true, the air breathable. When he ventured even a few hundred feet away to scout or forage, an anxious, hollow ache would begin to grow in her chest, a phantom pain that only subsided when he returned. It was a terrifying dependency, yet it was also the most profound comfort she had ever known. For Ash, the experience was different. The world had become loud. Not with sound, but with information. He could feel the flow of a hidden stream 50 yards to their left. He could sense the subtle shift in air pressure that heralded a coming rainstorm hours before the clouds gathered. Time, for him, had become elastic. In moments of calm, it was normal. But when his heart rate climbed, when a branch snapped unexpectedly, his perception would stretch. He'd experience a full second of thought and reaction in the sliver of an instant it took for a pebble to fall. He was learning to control it, but it was like trying to cup water in his hands. The power was too vast, too slippery. He'd reach for a falling canteen and his fingers would close on it an inch from its surface, the space around it warping almost imperceptibly to bring it to his hand. Pikachu's electricity was the most visible change. When they practiced, a simple quick attack would leave faint, shimmering afterimages, and a thunderbolt would cause the air to smell of ozone and freshly cut grass, a scent that Ash somehow knew was the smell of slightly fractured space. This morning, they were camped in a thicket of pine trees overlooking a winding road that led, according to their map, to the outskirts of Veilstone City. Their supplies were gone. They had a handful of berries, half a loaf of stale bread, and no other choice. "We have to risk it," Dawn said, her voice a low murmur. She was huddled next to him, peering through the dense needles of a pine bough. Piplup stood on her shoulder, mimicking her posture. We need food, medicine. And clothes that aren't torn to shreds. She gestured to the rip in Ash's jeans and the patched-up sleeve of her own coat. Brock, who had been cleaning their single cooking pot with a handful of leaves, sighed. She's right. We can't live like this forever. But Veilstone, it's big. They'll have a heavy security presence. Ash didn't answer immediately. He was watching a Krogunk hop along the side of the road below. He felt a familiar sense of calm emanating from it, a lazy contentment. His focus shifted, and he could feel the Krogunk's path, where it would go. It would hop 3 more times, then turn left and disappear into the undergrowth. He watched as it did exactly that. This casual prescience was becoming normal, and it scared him more than anything. I'll go, he said finally, his voice decisive. Alone. It's me they're really looking for. One person can slip in and out easier than 3. No, Dawn said instantly, the word sharp. The hollow ache flared in her chest at the mere suggestion. We go together. You'll stand out more on your own anyway, you always do. We look more like normal traveling trainers if we're in a group. She was grasping for logic, but the truth was purely emotional. She couldn't let him go. Brock nodded in agreement. Dawn's logic is sound. We'll be your cover. We just need to be smart. Hoods up, no eye contact, in and out as fast as possible. Ash looked at Dawn, saw the non-negotiable set of her jaw, and felt the echo of her anxiety through their bond. Arguing was pointless. More than that, he found he didn't want to. Her presence was a grounding force, a constant reminder of the humanity his new abilities threatened to erode. All right, he conceded. Together. We hit the big department store. Lots of people, easy to get lost in the crowd. We split up, get what we need, meet back at the west entrance in 1 hour. They made their way down to the road, pulling the hoods of their cloaks up to shadow their faces. Walking on pavement felt strange, exposed. Every passing car was a potential threat. As they approached the city's edge, the familiar sights of civilization, buildings, streetlights, the distant murmur of traffic, felt alien and hostile. Veilstone City was a place of stark contrasts, home to both a bustling game corner and a stoic, traditional gym. The streets were crowded, a river of humanity that they gratefully melted into. The plan was working. They were just 3 more faces in a sea of them. They reached the large, multi-story Veilstone department store, a monolith of glass and steel. Okay, Ash said, keeping his voice low. 1 hour. Don't be late. He gave Dawn a quick, reassuring look, then turned and disappeared into the throng of shoppers heading through the automatic doors. Brock gave Dawn a nod and headed off towards the pharmacy section. Dawn took a deep breath, pulling her hood down further, and made her way towards the clothing department, the comforting hum of Ash's presence already beginning to feel distant in the massive building. Ash moved with a new kind of purpose. The chaotic flow of the crowd wasn't overwhelming, he could feel the currents in it, the paths of least resistance. He navigated the aisles with an unconscious grace, grabbing a new backpack, a durable pair of boots, and several packs of dried rations. He could feel the security cameras, not by seeing them, but by sensing the focused energy of their electronic gazes. He kept his head down, his face obscured. He was heading for the checkout when a voice cut through the din, a voice that froze him in place. Pathetic. The word was spoken with a cold, dismissive clarity that was unmistakable. Ash turned slowly, his heart sinking. Standing at the end of the aisle, next to a display of poke balls, was Paul. His arms were crossed, his purple hair as sharp and severe as ever. He wasn't looking at the merchandise. His piercing, dark eyes were locked directly on Ash. He wasn't surprised or shocked to see him. He looked like he'd been waiting. Running and hiding, Paul continued, his voice low and laced with contempt. Is this what the hero of the spear pillar has been reduced to? Skulking in a department store like a common thief. Ash's hand instinctively went to Pikachu's pokeball on his belt. Paul. What are you doing here? I live here, remember? Paul said flatly. The better question is what you are doing here. The news said you and your friends were assisting the champion with the cleanup effort. They're lying. I can see it. You're a mess. You look like you've been sleeping in a ditch. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. And there's something else. Something different about you. I felt it the moment you walked into the city. Ash's blood ran cold. He had been so careful. But Paul. Paul had always been unerringly perceptive, his entire worldview built on analyzing and understanding power. I don't know what you're talking about, Ash said, his voice level. He needed to end this conversation. Now. Don't you? Paul's lips twisted into a sneer. I was on the outskirts of the mountain when it happened. I saw the sky break. I felt the energy wave when the chain shattered. It was biblical. And then, silence. Everyone is looking for Cyrus, but I know he was just the catalyst. The real event, the real source of that power, was you. It wasn't a question. Ash's carefully constructed composure was cracking. He had to get away. He started to turn. I have to go. You're not going anywhere, Paul snapped, moving to block his path. I've been searching for that energy signature for weeks. It's faint, but it's here. It's all over you. Whatever happened on that mountain, it changed you. You're stronger. I want to see it. This isn't the time or place for a battle, Paul. Then make time, Paul challenged, his eyes glinting with a familiar, obsessive fire. Or are you a coward now, too? I want to know what real power looks like. Not some half-baked strategy and the power of friendship. I want to see what you became up there. He gestured with his head toward the store's exit. The old battlefield. Behind the warehouses. 1 hour. Be there. Or I go to the police and tell them exactly who I found in their city. It was an ultimatum. A trap. But Paul had left him no choice. Going to the police would bring Aegis down on them in minutes. He could feel a headache starting, the pressure of his temporal sense flaring with the stress. He saw a dozen possible outcomes, all of them bad. The one where he fought Paul was simply the least catastrophic. Fine, Ash bit out, the word tasting like ash. You want a battle? You'll get one. He pushed past Paul, his shopping forgotten, and strode out of the store, a cold dread settling in his stomach. He had to find Dawn and Brock. He found them at the rendezvous point, their arms full of bags. The relief on Dawn's face when she saw him was instantly replaced by concern. Ash, what's wrong? You're pale. We have a problem, he said grimly, quickly explaining the encounter. Brock groaned, running a hand over his face. Paul. Of all the people. He's cornered you. If you run, he talks. If you fight, the energy output could be massive, Ash finished, his jaw tight. It could act like a flare for anyone looking for me. So what are we going to do? Dawn asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ash looked at her, then at Brock. The fear in their eyes solidified his resolve. He couldn't afford to be the reckless kid from Pallet Town anymore. He had to be smarter. He had to be in control. I'm going to fight him, he said. And I'm going to end it. Fast. He looked at Dawn, his gaze intense. I need you and Brock to be my lookouts. Circle the battlefield. If you see anyone who looks official or out of place, you signal me. A bird call. Anything. Understood? Dawn nodded, her own fear pushed aside by the urgency of the plan. Got it. The old battlefield was a stretch of cracked earth and gravel behind the Veilstone warehouses, a place where local trainers came to settle their scores. It was deserted now, the late afternoon sun casting long, skeletal shadows from the metal buildings. Paul was already there, standing on the far side of the field, his presence a beacon of cold intensity. "I was beginning to think you'd run," he called out as Ash approached. "I don't run from battles," Ash said, shrugging off his cloak. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, its cheeks sparking. The air was thick with tension. "Good," Paul said, a rare, sharp smile touching his lips. "This will be a full 6-on-6 battle. Let's see if you're worthy of the power you stumbled into." He threw his first pokeball. "Honchkrow, stand by for battle." The large, dark bird emerged with a menacing caw, its fedora-like crest casting a shadow over its sharp eyes. Ash took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic energy buzzing under his skin. He needed precision, not raw power. "Staraptor, I choose you." His own avian powerhouse appeared in a flash, its cry sharp and clear. As the two flying types faced off, Ash's perception shifted. The world bled of some of its color, and the flow of time seemed to thicken, like honey. He saw Honchkrow's potential moves laid out before him, a direct assault with Night Slash, a tactical retreat with Haze, a powerful dive with Sky Attack. "Honchkrow, Aerial Ace." Paul commanded, opting for speed. Honchkrow shot forward, a blur of black feathers. But to Ash, it was moving through molasses. "Staraptor, left wing down, pivot." "Use close combat on its approach," Ash said, his voice calm and measured. The command was so specific, so preemptive, that Staraptor reacted on pure instinct. It dipped its wing, spinning on an axis just as Honchkrow's attack was about to connect. The aerial ace, which could not miss, scraped harmlessly off its feathers as Staraptor was already moving into its own attack. Its talons and beak flashed in a furious, close-range assault. Honchkrow cried out in pain and surprise, thrown back by the unexpected counter. Paul's eyes widened slightly. That timing was impossible. It wasn't just a good prediction, it was perfect. "Don't let up. Staraptor, brave bird." Ash ordered. Staraptor enveloped itself in a shell of brilliant blue energy and rocketed across the field. "Dodge and use Night Slash." Paul countered. But Ash was already a step ahead. He could feel the space around Honchkrow, the path it would take to evade. Correct its path. Force it right. The command made no sense in a traditional battle, but Staraptor, connected to Ash's heightened state, seemed to understand. It angled its brave bird not at Honchkrow, but at the space just to its left, forcing the dark bird to dodge right, directly into the path Staraptor had anticipated. The collision was devastating. Honchkrow was blasted out of the air, landing in a heap. Paul stared, his mind racing. It was luck. It had to be. He recalled Honchkrow, his expression unreadable. "You've gotten lucky. That won't happen again. Ursaring, let's go." The massive bear Pokémon appeared with a deafening roar, its eyes glowing red. "Staraptor, return," Ash said calmly, recalling his tired Pokémon. "Bizel, I choose you." The sea weasel emerged, spinning in the air before landing, its inflatable sack already puffed up. A mismatch of type and size, but Ash saw the path to victory. "Ursaring, hammer arm." Paul roared. The bear charged, its massive fist glowing with power. "Bizel, aqua jet," Ash said. "Aim for the ground in front of it." Bizel shot forward in its watery torpedo, but instead of striking Ursaring, it slammed into the gravel at its feet. The ground exploded with water and loose rock, creating a smokescreen and a slippery mess. Ursaring bellowed in frustration. Its charge broken. "Now, sonic boom, circular pattern." Ash commanded. Bizel spun, firing off rings of sonic energy that ricocheted wildly inside the cloud of dust and water. Ursaring roared in pain, unable to see its opponent. "Just focus, blast and destroy everything." Paul yelled, losing his composure for a moment. Ursaring began to form a sphere of blue energy, but it was disoriented. Ash felt a flicker, a cold spike in the periphery of his senses. For a split second, a shadow in the alley between two warehouses seemed to stretch, to contort into a shape that was geometrically wrong. He flinched, the distraction almost breaking his focus. Giratina. A whisper in the back of his mind. He shook it off. He had to end this. Beisel, water gun, full pressure, at its feet. The jet of water hit the mud they'd created, splashing up and coating Ursaring's legs. Now, ice beam. Brock, watching from a rooftop, would have recognized the move. It was a contest combination. An ice-aqua jet. What? Paul scoffed. Beisel doesn't know ice, it does now, Ash said under his breath. He had spent the last 3 weeks teaching his Pokémon new, unconventional moves, preparing for asymmetrical fights. Beisel unleashed a beam of frigid energy into the water gun stream. The water froze instantly, encasing Ursaring's legs and feet in a solid block of ice, cementing it to the ground. The bear roared, trying to move, but it was trapped. Now, Aqua Jet, Ash said, his voice dropping. Beisel shot forward and slammed into the immobilized Ursaring's chest with the force of a battering ram. The giant bear slumped forward, held up only by the ice, and fainted. Paul was silent. He recalled Ursaring, his knuckles white around the pokeball. This wasn't luck. This was a level of strategy he had never seen from Ash. It was predictive, flawless, and utterly humiliating. He looked at Ash, not with anger now, but with a burning, analytical curiosity. How? Paul asked, his voice barely a whisper. You wanted a battle, Ash replied, his face grim. Let's finish it. Torterra, stand by. The colossal tortoise Pokémon emerged, a living ecosystem on its back. The ground shook. Ash met the challenge. Grotle, I choose you. His own mid-evolution Pokémon appeared, smaller and outmatched, but resolute. As the battle raged on, Ash continued to display his unnerving new competence. He used Grotle's surprising speed to outmaneuver the larger Torterra, landing an energy ball before ducking away from a devastating earthquake. He had Infernape use Flare Blitz not as an attack, but as a heat shield to detonate Torterra's seed bomb prematurely. Each move was perfect. Each command was issued a fraction of a second before it was needed. To Paul, it looked like Ash was reading his mind. But Ash was simply reading the world. He felt the charge building in Torterra's body before it launched a hyper beam, giving Infernape just enough time to dig underground. The final matchup was Pikachu against Paul's last conscious Pokémon, his powerhouse Electivire. The two electric types faced each other, the air crackling with stored energy. This ends now. Paul roared, his frustration boiling over. Electivire, thunder. Pikachu, dodge it. Ash yelled. But as the colossal bolt of lightning crashed down from the sky, Ash felt something give. The strain of consciously suppressing the full extent of his power, of holding the floodgates closed while letting just a trickle through, was immense. The raw energy of Electivire's thunder acted as a catalyst. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. For Ash, the world went silent and monochrome. The lightning bolt from the heavens was frozen in place, a jagged, beautiful sculpture of pure energy. Electivire was a statue of snarling fury. Paul's mouth was open mid-shout. He could see the individual dust motes hanging in the air. He could have walked over, inspected the lightning bolt, and walked back without anyone noticing. The temptation to do so, to use this incredible power, was overwhelming. No. He had to control it. He couldn't reveal this. He focused all his will on Pikachu. Move, he thought, the command a pure mental projection. In the frozen world, Pikachu moved. It took a single, fluid step to the left, its body a blur of normal color in the gray landscape. Then, Ash let go. Time snapped back into place with the force of a physical blow. The sound of the thunderclap was deafening. The bolt of lightning slammed into the ground where Pikachu had been a nanosecond before, carving a smoking black crater. Paul's jaw dropped. No one could react that fast. It wasn't possible. Ash felt dizzy, a wave of nausea washing over him. The world swam in his vision. He had held it too long. Pikachu, he gasped, forcing himself to focus. Volt tackle, he didn't need to finish the command. Pikachu, buzzing with a strange, residual temporal energy, shot forward. It wasn't just a quick attack with electricity. The space around Pikachu seemed to curve, to shorten. It crossed the battlefield in an instant, its path not entirely straight, arriving at Electivire from an angle that shouldn't have been possible. Pika Pika Pikachu. The impact was absolute. It wasn't just an electrical attack, it felt heavier, denser. Electivire was lifted off its feet and thrown backwards, crashing into the warehouse wall with enough force to dent the corrugated metal. It slid to the ground, unconscious. Silence. The battle was over. Ash had won. Decisively. But as he stood there, swaying on his feet, the world still tilting around him, he knew he had lost control. He had shown too much. And he had paid the price. From the rooftop to the east, he heard it. A high-pitched, warbling whistle. The cry of a starly. But it wasn't a starly. It was Dawn's signal. His blood turned to ice. They're here. Paul was recalling his Electivire, his face a mask of stunned disbelief and dawning horror. What was that? He breathed, looking at Ash not as a rival, but as something inhuman. Ash didn't have time to answer. We have to go. Now, he snapped, already turning to run. Then, they appeared. Figures in sleek, dark gray tactical gear, emerging from the alleyways with silent, coordinated efficiency. They didn't carry pokeballs on their belts. They carried strange, rifle-like devices that hummed with a low, menacing energy. On their shoulders was an insignia, a stylized shield enclosing a balanced scale. Aegis. Target identified, a voice crackled over their radios, cold and impersonal. Alpha-level energy signature confirmed. Designate, Ash Ketchum. Subdue. Do not terminate. One of them raised his rifle. It wasn't aimed at Ash. It was aimed at Paul. Civilian witness. Neutralize. A dart shot from the barrel. Ash's temporal sense flared again, a desperate, instinctual burst. He saw the dart's trajectory, saw it heading for Paul's neck. Without thinking, he shoved Paul, hard. Get down. The dart flew past Paul's head and clattered against the warehouse wall. The Aegis soldiers adjusted their aim. Run. Ash yelled at Paul. For once, Paul didn't argue. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted in the opposite direction, disappearing behind a stack of crates. The soldiers let him go. He wasn't the target. Ash was now facing half a dozen of them alone. Pikachu was on his shoulder, its cheeks sparking furiously. Surrender, Ketchum, the lead soldier said, his voice amplified by his helmet. You are an unsanctioned Class A anomaly. Do not force us to escalate. Ash didn't reply. He was already moving, sprinting towards the narrow alley where the strange shadow had been. It was his only way out. As he ran, a soldier fired a net launcher. The net flew through the air, but just before it reached him, a torrent of iridescent bubbles sprayed out from a rooftop, coating the ground in a slick, soapy film. The lead soldier slipped, his shot going wide. Dawn. Ash plunged into the alley. It was a dead end. A brick wall stood 10 feet high. He was trapped. The soldiers were entering the alley behind him. Nowhere to run, anomaly. Suddenly, a section of the wall to his left exploded inwards, showering him with brick dust. Brock Sudowoodo stood there, its arms still raised from a powerful double edge. "This way!" Brock yelled from the other side. Ash scrambled through the hole into an adjacent alley. He could hear the soldiers shouting behind him. He saw Dawn and Brock 50 feet ahead, waving frantically. "Hurry!" He was almost there when an Aegis soldier appeared on the rooftop above, taking aim. Before the soldier could fire, a flash of pink light erupted beside him. Dawn's Pachirisu, thrown up to the roof by Brock's Geodude, used Sweet Kiss. The soldier swayed, a dopey, confused look on his face, and lowered his weapon. "Brilliant!" Brock shouted, impressed by Dawn's quick thinking. They sprinted through the labyrinthine alleys of Veilstone's industrial sector. The chase was relentless. Drones, small, wasp-like machines, buzzed overhead, tracking their every move. Aegis teams were cutting off intersections, their movements coordinated and precise. They were about to be cornered again when Dawn skidded to a halt. "Piplup, Ice Beam! Cover the street!" Piplup unleashed a wide, sweeping beam that coated the asphalt in a sheet of treacherous ice. The Aegis soldiers rounding the corner behind them slipped and piled into each other in a clatter of armor and curses. It bought them precious seconds. They ducked into a cavernous, abandoned warehouse, the air thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. They were panting, their lungs burning. "They're too good," Brock gasped, leaning against a pillar. "They're not like Team Rocket. They're professionals. We're not going to be able to outrun them," Dawn said, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at Ash, who was staring at a dark corner of the warehouse, his expression distant. A cold draft was coming from that corner, a draft that felt fundamentally wrong. "Ash," she said, touching his arm. The contact seemed to jolt him back to the present. "This way," he said, his voice strangely certain. He led them towards the cold spot. The shadows there seemed deeper, darker than they should be. As they got closer, the perspective of the corner seemed to shift, the lines of the walls not quite meeting at a 90-degree angle. It was the same wrongness he had felt during the battle. "What is it?" Brock asked, unnerved. "A way out," Ash murmured. He reached out and touched the wall. His fingers met no resistance. They passed through the concrete as if it were smoke. He felt a spike of icy cold, a malevolent amusement from the deepest recesses of his mind. Giratina's influence. It was a trap. But it was also an escape. The warehouse doors burst open, and a full squad of Aegis soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Nowhere left to go. "Trust me," Ash said to Dawn and Brock, his eyes glowing faintly with their pink and blue light. He grabbed their hands and pulled them with him, stepping fully into the distorted, shadowy corner. For the Aegis soldiers, it was a sight that would haunt their mission reports for years. The three fugitives simply walked into a solid concrete wall and vanished. The strange, cold draft disappeared. The corner was just a corner again. The squad leader slowly lowered his weapon, his scanner whining as it failed to find any trace of them. "Sir," he said into his comms, his voice strained. "Target has phased through solid matter. I repeat, the anomaly has escaped." He just walked through a wall. Miles away, in a dark forest on the other side of Veilstone City, Ash, Dawn, and Brock stumbled out of the shadow of a massive oak tree, collapsing onto the soft earth, gasping. They had been in that non-space for only a second, but it had felt like an eternity of falling through ice. They lay there for a long time, the silence of the forest a welcome balm. Finally, Brock pushed himself into a sitting position, his face pale and drawn. "Ash," he said, his voice heavy. "I can't do this." Ash and Dawn looked at him. The words hung in the air between them. "I'm not a fugitive," Brock continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm a breeder. I'm going to be a Pokemon doctor. I have a family in Pewter City. I can't live like this, looking over my shoulder every second, fighting, whatever those things were." He looked at Ash, his eyes full of a deep, painful sadness. And I'm a liability. They saw me with you. They saw Dawn. Staying with you puts a target on all of our backs. But if I leave, maybe I can draw some of their attention away. Give you a chance. Brock, no, Dawn started, but Ash put a hand on her shoulder. He knew Brock was right. He had known since the spear pillar. Brock's path was one of healing, of structure, of home. This life of shadows and running would destroy him. Ash got to his feet and walked over to his oldest friend. He put a hand on Brock's shoulder. I know, he said softly. I get it. You need to go home, Brock. You need to be safe. Tears welled in Brock's eyes. He had been with Ash through 3 regions, through countless battles and adventures. He was the steady, older brother. Leaving felt like a betrayal, even if it was the right thing to do. Ash, what happened to you? He asked, his voice thick. That power, I don't know, Ash admitted, his own voice tight with emotion. But I'm not going to let it hurt anyone. I'm going to learn to control it. He squeezed his friend's shoulder. You were right there with me from the beginning. Thank you. For everything. There were no more words needed. Brock stood up and pulled Ash into a fierce, desperate hug. Then he turned and did the same to Dawn, who was now openly crying. You look after him, Dawn, Brock whispered to her. He's going to need you more than ever. I will, she promised, her voice choked. Brock gave them one last, long look, a look that said 1,000 goodbyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his broad shoulders slumping as he disappeared into the trees, heading towards a road that would eventually lead him home. Ash and Dawn stood in the fading light, the silence of the forest pressing in on them. For the first time, they were truly, completely alone. The thrill of the escape had evaporated, leaving behind a profound sense of loss and a terrifying, uncertain future. Dawn wiped her eyes, her hands still tingling from the icy passage through the shadow. She looked at Ash, who was staring at the worn map in his hands. He looked so strong, so competent during the fight, but now, in the quiet aftermath, she could see the immense weight on his shoulders. She stepped up beside him, her presence a silent offering of support. She placed her hand on his arm, the familiar, grounding hum of their connection flowing between them. He didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, a barely perceptible shift, but she felt it. So, she said softly, her voice still a little shaky. Where to? Now. Ash looked at the map, at the sprawling wilderness of Sinnoh, a land now full of hunters and ghosts. His mismatched eyes, glowing faintly in the twilight, found a new destination, a place of myth and isolation. We need help, he said, his voice regaining its new, steady resolve. Someone who understands this kind of power. He pointed to a small, remote island off the northern coast, a place circled on the map with a question mark they had drawn weeks ago. We go here. To Iron Island. Together, they looked at the spot on the map, a tiny speck in a vast sea of unknown. They were fugitives, hunted by a force with limitless resources and haunted by a god from another dimension. They had just one ally left in the entire world, each other. And as the last light of day faded from the sky, that seemed like it would have to be enough. Chapter 3, The Whispering City. Jubilife City was a different kind of jungle. The dense, cloying canopy of the forest had been replaced by a sprawling urban sprawl of glass and steel that clawed at the sky. The hidden streams were now rivers of people, flowing through concrete canyons, their faces illuminated by the neon glow of 100,000 advertisements. For 2 people trying to be invisible, it was both the perfect hiding place and the most dangerous trap in Sinnoh. 2 weeks had passed since their frantic escape from Veilstone and their heart-wrenching farewell to Brock. The journey north had been a blur of cold nights and tense days, the specter of Aegis lurking in every shadow. Ash's control had grown, but so had the frequency of the whispers. The wrongness he had first felt in Veilstone now bled into the world at random, fleeting moments. A puddle that reflected the sky from an hour ago. The sound of footsteps that left no prints. He would subtly flex his new senses, a mental push, and reality would snap back into alignment, the act leaving him with a phantom chill and the unnerving feeling of being watched by something vast and cold. They had arrived in Jubilife City out of sheer necessity. Iron Island was their goal, but it was a remote, storm-shrouded rock in the sea. Reaching it required a boat, supplies, and information, none of which they could acquire as fugitives. They needed to disappear properly. They needed new identities, new faces. And in a city as big as Jubilife, the only way to get something like that was to dive into the places the light didn't touch. They found themselves in a district the tourist maps didn't show, a tangle of back alleys behind the glittering facade of the trainer's school. Here, the air was thick with the smell of fried food, cheap perfume, and desperation. The neon signs were cracked, and the people moved with a furtive energy, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "This is it," Dawn murmured, pulling the hood of her new, drab gray cloak lower. Her vibrant blue hair was tucked away beneath a simple beanie, but she still felt horribly exposed. The comforting hum of Ash's presence was a small, warm anchor in the overwhelming sea of unfamiliar, anxious energy. Ash, his own cloak hiding the powerful frame he was growing into, nodded. His senses were on fire. The alley was a cacophony of minor spatial and temporal distortions. A clock on a shop wall was missing the number 7. A street vendor's reflection in a grimy window was a split second out of sync with his movements. It was like the city's underbelly was a place where reality had grown thin and frayed at the edges. Giratina's influence was stronger here, drawn to the chaos and secrets. "The place is called the Gilded Krogunk," Ash said, recalling the hushed instructions they'd gotten from a nervous kid in a Pokemon Center 2 towns back. "It's an information broker's front. The kid said the man in charge, Phantom, can get you anything if the price is right." They found it tucked away at the end of a blind alley, marked only by a faded brass sign of a Krogunk wearing a monocle. The door was heavy, unmarked steel. Ash knocked, a specific rhythm, 2 quick taps, a pause, then 3 more. A slot slid open at eye level, and a pair of suspicious eyes peered out. "What do you want?" a gruff voice demanded. "We're looking for a new beginning," Ash said, using the coded phrase they'd been given. The eyes narrowed, then the slot slammed shut. A series of heavy bolts were thrown, and the door scraped open just wide enough for them to slip through. The inside was not the dingy dive bar they had expected. It was surprisingly lavish, a pocket of opulence in a sea of decay. The room was circular, lit by a low-hanging chandelier of cut crystal. Plush velvet couches were arranged in discreet alcoves. The air smelled of expensive cologne and old books. A handful of patrons, a woman in a fur coat stroking a Persian, a man whose face was entirely hidden by shadow, sat in silence, pointedly ignoring them. At the center of the room, behind a large, polished mahogany desk, sat the man himself. He was impossibly thin, dressed in a flamboyant purple suit that was at least a decade out of style. His face was long and pale, dominated by a meticulously waxed mustache and a pair of spectacles perched on his sharp nose. He was observing a Pokemon contest on a small, state-of-the-art monitor, a look of profound boredom on his face. This was Phantom. He didn't look up as they approached. "Close the door. You're letting the smell of mediocrity in." Ash closed the heavy door, the bolts locking automatically behind them. He and Dawn approached the desk. Phantom paused the contest playback, the image of a coordinator's binary mid-spin frozen on the screen. "A new beginning," he drawled, his voice a silky, condescending tenor. He finally raised his eyes, peering at them over the top of his spectacles. He looked at Ash, then his gaze lingered on Dawn. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Well. I know you. Dawn. The little starlet of the Sinnoh Grand Festival. Your Wallace Cup performance was adequate. A bit heavy on the sparkles, light on genuine artistry, but adequate. Dawn stiffened, a flush of anger rising in her cheeks. Before she could retort, Ash stepped forward slightly. "We're not here to discuss contests," Ash said, his voice quiet but firm, drawing Phantom's attention. "We need new identities. Trainer IDs, travel permits, bank accounts. Clean, untraceable." Phantom leaned back in his chair, steepling his long, pale fingers. He studied Ash, his gaze analytical. "That is a very tall order, my friend. The kind of order that attracts unwanted attention. The kind of order that suggests you are running from something significant." He gestured to 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Please. Sit. Tell me why I should risk my perfectly comfortable, profitable enterprise for 2 stray children in shabby cloaks." They sat. The velvet was soft, but the chair felt like a trap. "We can pay," Dawn said, her voice regaining its composure. They had pooled the last of their money, a meager sum that now felt insultingly small. Phantom let out a short, sharp laugh. "My dear, the kind of services you're requesting can't be bought with the pocket money of a fledgling coordinator. I trade in a far more valuable currency: influence. Favors. Information." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are in trouble. Deep trouble. The kind of trouble that makes a person a ghost. But ghosts have their uses." Ash's eyes narrowed. "What's the price?" Phantom smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "A simple business transaction. There is a rival of mine, a vulgar brute named Silas, who runs a smuggling operation out of the Jubilife port. He deals in rare Pokemon, a practice I find utterly distasteful." He said it with the air of a man who found distasteful things profitable in other ways. "His operation has been unusually successful lately. Too successful. He is moving his merchandise with an efficiency that suggests he has protection. Powerful protection. You want us to take him down?" Ash asked, cutting to the chase. "Heavens, no," Phantom scoffed. "Violence is so uncreative. I want you to disrupt his next big shipment. It's happening in 2 nights. A cargo ship called the SS Trident is scheduled to depart at midnight. I don't want the Pokemon freed, I don't want Silas arrested. I want the shipment to be a catastrophic, public failure. I want his mysterious benefactors to see him as an incompetent liability." "Why us?" Dawn asked, her suspicion palpable. "Because you are desperate," Phantom said simply. "And because you are unknown. My own people would be recognized. You too, you are ghosts. Perfect for a haunting." He pushed a thin data chip across the desk. "This contains everything you need. The ship's layout, guard schedules, cargo manifests. Make a mess. Cause a scene. Humiliate Silas. Do this for me, and when you return, you will find yourselves reborn. New names, new lives, and a small purse to get you started on your way." Ash picked up the chip. He could feel the weight of the deal settling on them. They would be breaking the law, not for survival, not to escape, but as pawns in a criminal turf war. It felt dirty. But as he looked at Dawn, at the exhaustion and fear that she tried so hard to hide, he knew they had no other option. "We'll do it," he said. Phantom's smile widened. "Excellent. I knew you were people of practical sensibilities." He waved a dismissive hand. "Now go. Plan your little spectacle. I have a contest to critique." He turned back to his monitor, and they were forgotten. They spent the next 48 hours in a cramped, rented room above a noodle shop, the air thick with the smell of broth and the constant hum of the city. The data chip contained everything Phantom had promised, and more. The SS Triton was an old cargo freighter, heavily modified. The guard patrols were tight, but predictable. The cargo manifest listed dozens of rare Pokemon, from Trapinch sourced from desert regions to Beldum from the mountains of Hoenn. But as Dawn cross-referenced the ship's registration number with public shipping logs, she found the discrepancy Phantom had suspected. The ship's official owner was a shell corporation. A shell corporation whose parent company, she discovered after 3 hours of digging through digitized financial records, was a primary contractor for the Devon Corporation. And the Devon Corporation was a known technology supplier for law enforcement and government task forces. Aegis, Dawn breathed, pushing the laptop toward Ash. The smugglers. They're a front for Aegis. Ash stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place. It's a sting operation. Or a supply chain. They're not smuggling Pokemon to sell them. They're capturing them for study. To develop their anti-legendary technology. He clenched his fist. And Phantom wants us to walk right into the middle of it. He's setting us up, Dawn said, her heart pounding. He gets rid of his rival, and he serves us up to Aegis on a silver platter. He probably gets a massive reward. Ash stood up and began to pace the small room, his mind racing faster than ever before. The temporal sense that had been a burden now became a tool. He saw the possibilities branching out. If they ran, Phantom would expose them. If they walked into the trap, they would be captured. No, he said, stopping in front of the window. He looked down at the teeming street below. He thinks we're desperate pawns. He's underestimating us. We're not going to walk into his trap. We're going to walk into ours. A new energy filled the room, a spark of defiance. Dawn looked at him, her fear replaced by a familiar surge of confidence in his seemingly impossible plans. What are you thinking? Phantom wants a disruption, Ash said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. We'll give him one. But not the one he's expecting. We're not just going to humiliate Silas. We're going to blow their whole operation wide open. That night, under the cold, unblinking gaze of a crescent moon, they shared a quiet moment on the fire escape of their rented room. The city sprawled before them, a universe of glittering lights and deep shadows. The constant noise was a distant, soothing hum. They had been moving for so long, so relentlessly, that this brief pause felt like a lifetime. Are you scared? Dawn asked softly, her voice barely carrying over the city's murmur. She hugged her knees to her chest, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her arms. Ash was leaning against the railing, his silhouette stark against the neon glow. He didn't answer for a moment, his gaze lost in the labyrinth of lights. I'm terrified, he admitted, his voice raw with a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. Every day, I feel less like myself. The power, it wants to be used. When I get angry, time stutters. When I'm happy, I feel like I could just step from here to that rooftop over there. He pointed to a building a block away. Holding it back is like trying to hold my breath underwater. And the whispers. Giratina, it feels like it's always there, just at the edge of my sight, waiting for me to slip. He turned to look at her, his mismatched eyes, blue and pink, glowing with a soft, melancholy light in the darkness. But the most terrifying part is, I'm not sure I could do this without you. That connection we have, when I'm about to lose control, it's like your presence pulls me back. It's the only thing that feels real anymore. Dawn's heart ached for him. She reached out and took his hand. It was warm, solid. The hum of their bond intensified, a comforting thrum of shared existence. You're not alone in this, Ash. That feeling. I have it too. It's like, I don't know where I end and you begin sometimes. She squeezed his hand. When you were shoved towards that void on the mountain, I felt erased. And when you came back, and I touched you, it was like I was whole again for the first time. I'm not just staying with you because I'm scared to be alone. I'm staying with you because being with you is the only thing that makes any sense. Their eyes met, and in that moment, under the neon-dusted sky of Jubilife City, the nature of their bond shifted. It was no longer just a metaphysical consequence of a cosmic accident. It was a conscious choice. A shared vulnerability that had forged something stronger than fear, stronger than dependence. It was a partnership, absolute and unconditional. Ash brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then we do this together," he whispered. "No matter what." "No matter what," she echoed, her voice thick with emotion. The SS Triton was a rust bucket of a freighter, groaning at its moorings in the darkest, most neglected corner of the Jubilife port. The air was heavy with the smell of salt, brine, and diesel. Aegis agents, disguised as rough-looking dockworkers, patrolled the perimeter with a lazy confidence that betrayed their certainty. They weren't expecting trouble. At 11:45 p.m., a battered delivery truck rumbled up to the main gate. The driver, a nervous-looking man in a greasy jumpsuit, handed over a manifest. "Late delivery. Food supplies for the crew." The guard grunted, barely glancing at the forged paperwork Ash had spent hours creating. "You're not on the list." "Boss'll have my hide if I bring this back," the driver whined. "Just perishables. Look, I'll even give you a case of moo-moo milk for your trouble." As the guard was distracted by the bribe, two shadows detached themselves from the undercarriage of the truck. Ash and Dawn rolled silently into the deep darkness beneath the pier, the guards none the wiser. The truck was eventually waved through, a small, successful diversion. They moved like ghosts through the forest of support beams under the docks. Ash's senses were a perfect map of the area. He felt the guards' patrol routes as paths of focused intent, the caged Pokémon in the ship's hold as faint sparks of life and fear. Their first target was the communications hub on the pier. While Ash used Beisel to create a subtle, high-frequency sonic disruption that would garble any outgoing transmissions for a few crucial minutes, Dawn, using her coordinator's delicate touch, had Pachirisu use its electrical abilities to splice a loop into the security camera feed. To anyone watching, the pier was still quiet and empty. Phase 1 was complete. Now for the main event. "Ready?" Ash whispered, looking at Dawn. She nodded, her face grim but resolute. She released Piplup and Buniri, her two most versatile partners. "Let's give them a show they'll never forget." Ash used a subtle spatial warp, a trick he'd been practicing in secret, to unlock the main cargo bay door from the inside. The heavy steel door slid open with a low groan. They slipped inside, the vast, dark hold filled with rows upon rows of metal cages. The air was thick with the scent of frightened Pokémon. "Okay," Ash whispered. "You start the main event. I'll handle the welcome party." Dawn nodded and, with her Pokémon, began moving down the rows, not opening the cages, but attaching small, modified contest capsule devices to each one. Each capsule was packed with a specific combination of seals, starbursts, bubbles, flowers, and smoke. Meanwhile, Ash took up a position near the cargo bay entrance. He heard the approaching footsteps of a patrol. 2 Aegis agents. He closed his eyes, and time stretched. He saw their path. He saw the crate they would pause beside. Pikachu, Iron Tail. On that support beam. "Now," he murmured. Pikachu leaped, its tail glowing with a metallic sheen, and struck a corroded support beam above the patrol's path. The rusted metal groaned and snapped. A cascade of loose pipes and empty crates crashed down, creating a barricade that blocked the corridor just as the 2 agents rounded the corner. They were startled but unharmed, and most importantly, trapped. The crash, however, was the signal. Alarms blared across the ship. Shouts echoed from the deck. The trap had been sprung. On the pier, Phantom watched from the shadows of a distant warehouse, a pair of high-powered binoculars to his eyes. He smiled. The children had taken the bait. Any moment now Aegis would swarm the ship and capture them. He would be rewarded for his tip, and his rival Silas, the brutish commander of this Aegis front, would be disgraced for letting 2 kids dismantle his operation. But the scene that unfolded was not what he expected. From the cargo hold of the SS Trident, there wasn't an explosion. There was a spectacle. With a synchronized click, every capsule Dawn had planted went off at once. The cargo hold erupted in a dazzling, chaotic display of contest effects. Brilliant starbursts lit up the darkness, showers of harmless pink hearts filled the air, and thick, billowing clouds of obscuring smoke poured from the open doors. Aegis agents, led by a furious, bull-necked man Ash recognized from the data chip as Silas, stormed the pier, only to be met by a scene of utter madness. The entire ship was now the centerpiece of a citywide light show. "What is this?" Silas roared. "Report." But his agents were disoriented by the dazzling, non-threatening chaos. And then, the Pokémon came out. Ash, moving with a speed that seemed impossible in the swirling smoke, was now systematically opening every cage. But he wasn't just releasing the Pokémon. He was giving them directions. "Turtwig, head for the gardens by the TV station. Staraptor will guide you," he yelled, pointing as his own powerful bird Pokémon swooped low, calling out. "Bizel, take the water types. Follow the city's canal system, it leads straight to the ocean." It wasn't a panicked stampede. It was an organized, strategic evacuation. The Pokémon, sensing Ash's calm, authoritative energy, followed his commands. A stream of Trapinch burrowed under the pier, a flock of Pidgey took to the sky, and a group of water types leaped into the harbor, led by a cheering Bizel. Silas and his Aegis team were completely overwhelmed. They were prepared for a fight, not a parade. They tried to fire their containment nets, but the air was too thick with smoke and sparkles. Phantom lowered his binoculars, his jaw slack with disbelief. This wasn't the plan. This was art. A performance. And a devastatingly effective one. He had wanted humiliation, and he was getting it, but not just for Silas. The entire city was now witnessing this. News helicopters were already beginning to buzz in the distance. On the ship's deck, Ash and Dawn stood back to back, a bastion in the center of the beautiful chaos they had created. "Silas." Ash's voice, amplified by a subtle trick of spatial resonance, boomed across the pier. "Your operation is over. We've already sent a full copy of your unedited shipping manifests and your connection to Aegis to every news outlet in Sinnoh. It was a bluff, but a good one." Silas roared in fury. "Get them. I want them." He and two of his elite guards charged up the gangplank. "Dawn, now!" Ash yelled. Dawn, who had been preparing for this, threw a pokeball into the air. Mamoswine, spotlight. Her colossal Mamoswine appeared in a flash of light. Piplup, whirlpool. Buniri, ice beam. Piplup created a swirling vortex of water on the gangplank, and Buniri instantly froze it. Silas and his men slipped on the unexpected sheet of ice, sliding uncontrollably down the ramp and crashing into a heap on the pier, much to the delight of the now gathering news cameras. It was the perfect humiliation. Phantom, from his hiding spot, actually applauded. But their victory was short-lived. A new presence arrived on the scene, one that made the air grow cold and still. A sleek, black hovercraft descended from the sky, landing silently on the far end of the pier. The Aegis insignia was emblazoned on its side. The ramp lowered, and a single figure stepped out. It was Commander Valerius. He was dressed in a sharp, formal military uniform, his expression calm and analytical. He surveyed the scene, the ridiculous light show, the fleeing Pokémon, the incompetent Silas being helped to his feet, and finally, the two figures on the deck of the ship. His eyes, cold and intelligent, locked onto Ash. The moment their gazes met, Ash felt it. A pressure. Valerius wasn't just a soldier. He was a force. The casual chaos of the scene seemed to dampen in his presence. "Well," Valerius said, his voice calm but carrying with an unnatural clarity across the pier. "This is certainly more creative, than I anticipated. He didn't shout. He didn't give orders. He simply began to walk towards the ship, his presence radiating an authority that made the bumbling Silas and his team shrink back. "We need to go," Dawn said, her voice tight with a new kind of fear. This man was different. He was the real threat. Ash knew she was right. Their spectacle was over. The real fight was just beginning. He grabbed her hand. "Hold on tight," he said, pulling her towards the far side of the ship, away from the pier. "There's nowhere to go," she cried, looking at the dark, churning water of the harbor below. Ash gave her that same, reckless smile he had on the cliff of Mount Coronet. "There's always a way out." With Valerius and his elite guard advancing, Ash and Dawn leaped onto the ship's railing. For a horrifying second, they were silhouetted against the backdrop of their beautiful, chaotic masterpiece. Then, Ash focused, pulling on the spatial energy within him, not to stop time or warp a lock, but to fold. He pictured the alley in Jubilife, the one where they had seen the gilded Krogunk, the one where Giratina's influence was strongest. He poured his will into that image. To Valerius, who was now halfway across the pier, it was the most impossible thing he had ever witnessed. The two teenagers on the railing didn't jump. The space around them seemed to shimmer, to twist, and for a split second, the background behind them was not the Jubilife skyline, but a grimy brick alleyway. Then, they stepped backwards, into the alley, into a part of the city that was miles away, and vanished. The shimmering stopped. The space was normal again. They were gone. Valerius stopped walking. He stared at the empty spot on the railing, his calm expression finally breaking into one of cold, hard fury. He had seen the energy signature. A controlled, instantaneous spatial translocation. The anomaly wasn't just powerful. He was learning. He was growing. And he was creative. Back in the alley, Phantom lowered his binoculars, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He hadn't gotten his neat, tidy betrayal. He had gotten something far better. He had witnessed the birth of a legend. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would be seeing those two again. He turned and melted back into the shadows, a man who had just made the most interesting investment of his life. Ash and Dawn stumbled out of their spatial fold, collapsing against the cold brick wall of the alley, their hearts hammering. The jump had taken everything out of Ash. He was panting, sweat beading on his forehead, the world tilting precariously. Dawn held on to him, her own adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a profound exhaustion. Did we do it?" she gasped. "I think so," Ash managed, a weary grin on his face. He pushed himself up, leaning against her for support. "No new identities, though." "No," she said, a small laugh escaping her lips. "I don't think we need them anymore. They weren't ghosts. They weren't running and hiding. They had faced their pursuers head-on, not with brute force, but with wit, creativity, and a flair for the dramatic. They had turned a criminal's trap into a public declaration of defiance. They were no longer just fugitives. They were a cause." As they caught their breath in the silent alley, the distant sounds of sirens growing, Ash knew their lives had changed forever. They had a new, far more dangerous enemy in Commander Valerius. But they also had a new sense of purpose. They weren't just trying to survive. They were fighting back. And for the first time since the spear pillar, the terrifying power inside him felt less like a curse, and more like a chance. A chance to build a future, together, in a world that wanted to tear them apart. Chapter 4, The Guardian's Gambit. The sea was a beast. It threw their small, stolen fishing boat around with a contemptuous ease, hurling waves of frigid, slate-gray water over the bow. The sky was a bruised, churning mass of storm clouds that had chased them relentlessly since they'd fled the coast north of Jubilife. Every crash of a wave against the hull sounded like the fist of a titan, and the roar of the wind was a constant, maddening scream. Dawn was at the helm, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the wheel, her face pale and beaded with sea spray. Piplup was braced at her feet, occasionally firing a bubble beam at the waves as if to scold them. She felt the boat groan, the aging wood and metal protesting the abuse. Any normal vessel would have been swamped and sent to the bottom hours ago. But they weren't in a normal vessel. Not really. Ash stood at the bow, a lone figure against the fury of the storm, his cloak whipping around him like a frantic shadow. He wasn't fighting the storm. He was negotiating with it. His eyes, the familiar blue and pink, were glowing brightly in the gloom. He wasn't steering the boat with his hands, but with his will. A colossal rogue wave, a 30-foot wall of churning water, rose up before them, threatening to smash them into splinters. Dawn cried out, bracing for the impact. Ash didn't flinch. He extended a hand, and for a split second, the space directly in front of the boat seemed to thicken. The wave crashed against this invisible barrier, not with the force of an explosion, but with a strange, muffled thud, as if hitting a wall of dense gelatin. It parted around them, the water flowing past the boat on either side, leaving them in a pocket of impossible calm. The boat rocked, but it did not break. The effort cost him. Ash staggered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He gripped the railing, a wave of dizziness washing over him. The constant, subtle manipulation of space and probability to keep them afloat was a draining, monumental task. He had been doing this for 2 days straight, with only brief moments of rest. "I can see it." Dawn yelled over the wind, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. Through the sheeting rain and mist, a dark shape began to resolve itself. Iron Island. It was exactly as the myths described, a jagged, foreboding spike of rock and rusted earth, wreathed in a perpetual storm. It looked less like an island and more like a broken tooth jutting from the gums of the sea. Ash focused the last of his energy, guiding the battered boat through the treacherous, reef-strewn waters at the island's base. He found a hidden cove, a sliver of calm water protected by towering cliffs of iron-rich rock that glowed with a faint red sheen. With a final, shuddering groan, the boat scraped against a black sand beach, and they had arrived. They stumbled onto the shore, their legs shaky, the solid ground feeling strange and alien after days at sea. The storm raged around the island's perimeter, but here in the cove, the air was unnaturally still and quiet. Ash collapsed to his knees, the glow in his eyes fading, leaving him looking pale and utterly spent. Pikachu, who had been huddled inside his cloak, scurried onto his shoulder, chirping with worry. Dawn rushed to his side, helping him to a sitting position against a smooth, dark boulder. "Ash, you did it. You got us here." Her hand on his arm was a familiar anchor, the hum of their connection a comforting warmth against the island's oppressive chill. I can't keep doing that," he panted, his head swimming. "The power, it's too much. It feels like it's hollowing me out." The spectacular escape from Jubilife had been a turning point. It had felt like a victory, but it had also painted a massive target on their backs. They'd seen the news reports before they fled. Commander Valerius, in a crisp press statement, had declared them dangerous metahuman fugitives and the leaders of a pro-chaos terrorist cell. He had twisted their act of liberation into an act of anarchy. The world was now officially against them. That was why they were here. The legends of Iron Island spoke of a powerful Aura Guardian who had retreated to this place decades ago, a sage who understood the flow of life energy, of aura, that connected all things. If anyone in the world could help Ash understand, let alone control, the divine energy that was slowly consuming him, it was this man. After a few minutes of rest and a shared ration bar, they began their search. The island was a maze of rust-colored canyons and caves, the ground rich with iron deposits that played havoc with any sense of direction. The air itself felt heavy, ancient. They found the entrance to the main cavern system an hour later. It was not a grand opening, but a simple, unadorned archway in the rock. As they stepped through, the sound of the storm outside vanished completely, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The air inside was cool and dry, lit by a soft, internal luminescence from veins of glowing moss that traced patterns across the walls. They followed the main tunnel deeper into the earth. It opened into a vast, central cavern. In the middle of this cavern stood a single, perfectly balanced stone monolith. And sitting before it, in a meditative posture, was a man. He was old, his face a roadmap of deep lines, his long white hair and beard tied back with a simple leather cord. He wore the simple blue and black robes of an aura guardian. His eyes were closed, but he did not seem to be merely resting. He seemed to be listening to the silence of the island. As they approached, his eyes opened. They were a startling, piercing blue, and they seemed to see far more than just the two weary travelers standing before him. He looked at Dawn, a kind, understanding smile touching his lips. Then his gaze shifted to Ash, and the smile vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, weary gravity. He felt it. The storm of impossible energy raging just beneath the boy's skin. "You have come a long way," the man said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very stone around them. "And you have brought a tempest with you. Are you the guardian of this island?" Dawn asked, her voice respectful. "I am Riley," he said, his gaze still fixed on Ash. "And I am less a guardian of the island, and more a student of its silence." He slowly rose to his feet, his movements fluid and graceful, belying his age. He walked towards Ash, his piercing blue eyes scanning him from head to toe. A magnificent Lucario, its own aura senses no doubt screaming, materialized from the shadows behind him and stood at his side, its crimson eyes narrowed with intense suspicion. "You reek of paradox," Riley stated, stopping a few feet from Ash. "You are a vessel of creation's first breath, the powers of time and space, yet you are mortal. A finite being filled with an infinite power. It is a wonder you have not yet unraveled." Ash met his gaze, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. For the first time, he was facing someone who didn't see a weapon or a threat, but saw the truth of his condition. "Can you help me?" Ash asked, his voice strained. "I can't control it. It's getting stronger. And it's attracting other things." Riley's expression softened with a flicker of sympathy. "I cannot remove the power from you, boy. It is as much a part of you now as your own heartbeat. To try and extract it would be to extinguish you. But I can teach you. Not to control it, one does not control a hurricane. But to harmonize with it. To become the eye of your own storm." He turned and gestured for them to follow him deeper into the caves. "But this harmony is not a technique to be learned. It is a balance to be earned. I must know the nature of the one who wields such power. I must test your character." Over the next few days, Riley's tests began. They were not battles or physical trials. They were metaphysical, psychological. He led Ash to a chamber deep within the island where time did not flow consistently. In one corner, water dripped from a stalactite in slow motion, in another, moss grew and died in a matter of seconds. "The power of Dialga allows you to perceive all of time," Riley explained, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The past, the present, the future. 1,000 tragedies, 1,000,000 mistakes. The temptation to fix what has been broken will be a constant siren's call. Show me you can resist it." He left Ash alone in the chamber. As soon as he was gone, the air shimmered, and Ash was no longer in a cave. He was back in Pallet Town, on the day he had left on his journey. He saw himself, a brash, overconfident 10-year-old, sleeping in. He saw the 3 starter Pokémon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, being chosen by other trainers. He felt a pang of his old regret. He could change it. He could nudge his younger self awake. He could ensure he got a Squirtle, the Pokémon he'd originally wanted. It was a small thing. Harmless. He reached out, his hand trembling, his fingers about to brush against the dream image of his younger self. "Ash." Dawn's voice cut through the illusion like a knife. He blinked, and the scene vanished. He was back in the cave. Dawn was standing at the entrance, her face etched with worry. She had felt his distress through their bond, a sharp spike of conflicted energy, and had come running. "Don't," she said softly, her eyes pleading. "Your past, my past, it all led us here. To this moment. If you change any of it, you change us." He looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her eyes, and the temptation evaporated. She was right. Every mistake, every loss, every stupid decision had forged the person he was, the person she had chosen to stand by. To change the past would be to betray the present. He took a deep breath, the chaotic energy within him settling. "I'm okay," he said, his voice firm. He walked out of the chamber, leaving the ghosts of his past behind. Riley was waiting for them outside, a knowing look on his face. "The heart is a strong anchor against the tides of time," he said, nodding at Dawn. "You are wise to keep her close." The next trial took place in a cavern that seemed to have no floor, only a swirling mist of spatial energy. "Pakia's gift is mastery over space," Riley said, standing at the edge of the abyss. "Distance is a concept, not a law. But with the ability to be anywhere, you risk losing your sense of place. Of belonging nowhere." He gestured into the mist. "Show me you know where you stand." As Ash stared into the swirling vortex, it coalesced into an image. He saw his mother, Delia, in their kitchen in Pallet Town. She was looking out the window, a sad, worried expression on her face. He could feel her longing, her fear for him. The power in him surged. He could be there. In an instant. He could step through the mist and be in his own kitchen, telling her he was okay. He could hold her and ease her pain. The urge was a physical ache in his chest. But he hesitated. If he went, what then? He would bring Aegis, bring Giratina, bring all his troubles crashing down on her doorstep. He would be trading her peace of mind for his own. He thought of Brock, of the sacrifice he'd made to protect his own family. He thought of Dawn, who had given up her home, her dreams, everything, to walk this path with him. His place was not in Pallet Town anymore. His place was here, at her side, facing what was to come. He closed his eyes, severing the connection to the image, letting it dissolve back into mist. "My mother is safe," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "That's all that matters." He turned away from the abyss. When he opened his eyes, he saw Dawn smiling at him, a proud, brilliant smile that was worth more than any homecoming. Riley nodded slowly, a deep respect in his eyes. "You have a strong spirit. Stronger than you know. But the final trial is not for you alone." He led them to the central cavern with the monolith. "The power you hold is a fusion. Two opposing forces, bound together by the unique energy of your own spirit and your bond with your Pokémon. But it is unstable. One side will always seek to dominate the other. The order of time versus the chaos of space. You cannot master this power alone. You must be in perfect harmony with another. You must be two as one." He looked at Dawn. "You are his anchor. You ground him in the present, in a single point in space. But you have been a passive anchor. Now, you must become an active participant. You must learn to channel his power, to help him balance it." "Me?" Dawn asked, stunned. "But I don't have any powers." "You have his trust," Riley said simply. "And that is a power far greater than you imagine." He instructed them to stand on opposite sides of the monolith, placing their hands on the cool, smooth stone. "Ash, I want you to release your hold on your power. Let it flow. Do not fight it. Do not direct it. Just, let it be." "But it will," Ash started, his voice full of fear. "It will try to consume you," Riley finished grimly. "Dawn. You will feel it through your connection. You must pull him back. Not with force, but with focus. Be his lighthouse in the storm. Remind him of who he is. Ash took a deep, shaky breath and closed his eyes. He did as Riley instructed. He let go. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The cavern was flooded with raw, untamed energy. The air crackled, and the walls seemed to bend and warp. The soft moss light flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, illuminated only by the violent, pulsating glow radiating from Ash. The pink and blue light in his eyes flared, consuming his entire face. His body began to shimmer, to lose its solid form, flickering between reality and pure energy. Dawn cried out, not in fear, but in pain. The bond she shared with him became a conduit for pure agony. She felt the sensation of being torn apart by time and space, the same feeling Ash had experienced on the spear pillar. It was a symphony of cosmic horror, and it was overwhelming her. Focus, Dawn. Riley's voice cut through the chaos. Don't feel his pain. Feel him. Who is he? Dawn gritted her teeth, tears streaming down her face. She fought against the tide of agony. Who is he? He was Ash Ketchum. The boy who loved Pokemon more than anything. The boy who would climb a crumbling tower to save a single Pikachu. The boy who shared his sandwich with her on their first day. The boy who told her, no need to worry, before every contest. The boy who had just kissed her hand on a fire escape in Jubilife City. She poured all of it, every memory, every shared laugh, every moment of fear and triumph, into their bond. She didn't push, she didn't pull. She just held. She became a single, unwavering point of memory and emotion in the swirling chaos. Ash. She screamed, not with her voice, but with her soul. Come back. Inside the storm, Ash was lost. He was a disembodied consciousness adrift on an infinite ocean of power. He had no name, no form, no memory. There was only the ecstasy of omnipotence, the glorious freedom of being unbound by physical law. The temptation to let go, to dissolve into this cosmic bliss, was absolute. Then, he felt it. A single, warm point of light in the infinite darkness. A voice that wasn't a voice. A feeling. A memory of a blue beanie, a determined smile, a whispered promise. Dawn. The name was an anchor. A foundation. He remembered who he was. Ash. He was Ash. And she was waiting for him. He fought his way back towards the light, back towards her, rejecting the siren song of infinity. With a final, monumental effort of will, he seized control of the storm raging within him. The light in the cavern snapped back to reality. The warping walls solidified. The energy flooding the room didn't vanish, but coalesced, flowing back into Ash like a river returning to its banks. He stood there, panting, sweat-soaked, but solid. The glow in his eyes was still there, but it was calm, controlled. A placid sea, not a raging storm. He looked across the monolith at Dawn, who was slumped against the stone, exhausted but smiling. He had done it. No, they had done it. Riley let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Incredible, he whispered, a look of sheer awe on his face. Truly incredible. But their moment of triumph was shattered. From the entrance of the cavern, a cold, authoritative voice spoke. So this is where the anomaly has been hiding. And he's been receiving tutelage. How disappointing. They spun around. Standing in the archway, flanked by a dozen of his elite Aegis commandos in matte black armor, was Commander Valerius. He wasn't wearing his formal uniform now. He was clad in tactical gear, a sophisticated energy rifle held loosely in his hands. His calm, analytical expression was gone, replaced by one of grim determination. How did you find us? Dawn gasped. Valerius's lips curved into a cold smile. Your little light show at Jubilife Port was quite the spectacle, Miss Berlitz. It also left behind a unique, residual spatiotemporal energy signature. Extremely difficult to track. But not impossible. We simply had to follow the breadcrumbs of weirdness. He gestured around the cavern. A perpetual, localized storm system. A geologically impossible concentration of ferrous metals. All the signs pointed here. Riley stepped forward, placing himself between them and the soldiers. His Lucario moved with him, its arm spikes extending, a low growl rumbling in its chest. "This is a sacred place," Riley said, his voice dangerously low. "You are not welcome here, Commander." Valerius's gaze flickered to Riley, dismissing him as an irrelevant obstacle. "I have no quarrel with you, old man. Stand aside. My mission is with the boy. He is a walking threat to the stability of this planet, and I will see him contained." He raised his rifle, its barrel glowing with a menacing purple light. It was a weapon designed to disrupt energy fields. It was designed for Ash. "I will not allow you to turn this sanctuary into a battlefield," Riley stated, planting his feet. Valerius sighed, a sound of theatrical patience. "I had hoped to resolve this with a degree of civility. Clearly, I was mistaken. Subdue the Guardian. Secure the anomaly." The Aegis commandos moved with terrifying efficiency. They didn't use Pokemon. They used technology. Two of them fired devices that launched adhesive, high-tensile nets, instantly enveloping Riley and his Lucario, pinning them to the cavern wall. Lucario struggled, firing an aura sphere that was absorbed harmlessly by the net's energy-dampening material. "Now, catch him," Valerius said, taking aim at Ash. "Let's end this charade." Ash shoved Dawn behind him, his body thrumming with newly balanced power. He felt no fear. Only a cold, clear focus. "You made a mistake coming here," he said. "Oh?" Valerius asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And why is that?" "Because I'm not running anymore," Ash said. And he attacked. He didn't charge. He didn't send out a Pokemon. He raised his hand, and the very ground beneath the Aegis soldiers' feet seemed to lurch. He didn't cause an earthquake. He subtly warped the space they occupied, tilting their small section of the floor a sharp 20 degrees. They cried out in surprise, stumbling, their perfect formation breaking as they slid into each other. Valerius, his boots magnetizing to the floor, remained standing. He fired his rifle. A beam of purple energy shot towards Ash. Ash didn't dodge. He simply put up a hand, and a shimmering, translucent shield of distorted space appeared in front of him. The beam hit the shield and dissipated into harmless sparks. It was the same technique he had used against the wave, but refined, focused. "Impressive," Valerius conceded, his eyes narrowing. He tapped a command into his wrist gauntlet. Phase 2. Isolate and overwhelm. The commandos recovered, their boots now also magnetized. They began to advance, firing a volley of energy blasts from different angles. "Pikachu, Staraptor, Infernape, go!" Ash yelled, throwing 3 Pokeballs. His 3 powerhouse Pokemon appeared in a flash, ready for battle. "Dawn, get Riley and Lucario free," Ash commanded. Dawn didn't hesitate. While Ash and his team met the Aegis advance head-on, she and Piplup rushed to the ensnared Guardian. Piplup's bubble beam was useless against the nets, but Dawn, using the tactical creativity she had honed, had another idea. "Piplup, use Whirlpool on the wall around the net's anchors." The vortex of water began to eat away at the soft rock where the nets were secured. The cavern became a whirlwind of controlled chaos. It wasn't just a Pokemon battle. It was Ash and his team against Valerius's advanced, anti-Pokemon tactics. Staraptor's brave bird was met with targeted sonic cannons that disoriented it in mid-flight. Infernape's flare blitz was countered by cryo-grenades that instantly froze the ground in its path. But Ash was the conductor of this orchestra. He wasn't just giving commands. He was shaping the battlefield. He saw a commando taking aim at Pikachu and subtly slowed time for a fraction of a second, giving Pikachu the moment it needed to dodge and counter with a thunderbolt. He felt the trajectory of a cryo-grenade and warped space just enough for it to land harmlessly behind Infernape. He was fighting as a partner to his Pokémon, his power an extension of their strategy, not a replacement for it. Valerius watched, his expression hardening. He had planned for the anomaly's power. He had not planned for this level of synergy, this perfect, seamless integration of supernatural ability and classic Pokémon battling. Ash wasn't a god playing with toys. He was a master trainer who had been given the keys to the universe. Enough of this. Valerius roared, his professional calm finally breaking. He activated his own ace, a device on his back unfolded into a set of 4 floating drones, all connected to his gauntlet. Target his Pokémon. Overload them. The drones unleashed a coordinated barrage of energy attacks, forcing Ash's Pokémon onto the defensive. It was too much, too many angles. It was then that Dawn succeeded. The anchors gave way, and Riley and Lucario fell free of the nets. Riley tore the energy-dampening material off his partner. Lucario, Aura. Sphere. Riley commanded, his voice ringing with power. Lucario, now free, unleashed a massive sphere of blue energy, not at the soldiers, but at Valerius's drones, blasting 2 of them out of the air. The tide had turned. Valerius cursed, recalling his remaining drones. He looked at Ash, who now stood with his 3 powerful Pokémon, flanked by an Aura Guardian and his Lucario. His mission was a failure. He had underestimated his target's allies and the speed of his growth. "This isn't over, Ketchum," he snarled, pressing a button on his gauntlet. A blinding flash of light filled the cavern, and a high-frequency sonic pulse sent them all staggering back, clutching their ears. When their vision cleared, Valerius and his entire squad were gone. They had teleported away. Silence returned to the cavern, broken only by their heavy breathing. Riley walked over to Ash, a new, profound respect on his face. "You have passed the final trial," he said. "You faced an enemy who sought to control you, and instead of meeting him with overwhelming force, you fought with balance, with trust in your friends and your Pokémon. You have found your harmony." Ash looked at Dawn, who was smiling at him, her face smudged with dirt but shining with pride. He looked at his Pokémon, who gathered around him, battered but victorious. He felt the power within him, calm and steady, a part of him, no longer a raging beast but a loyal partner. "So what now?" Ash asked Riley. Riley's expression grew grim again. "Now, your real battle begins. Your enemy has seen your true strength. They will not come at you with soldiers again. They will send something far worse. And you still have the attention of the one who sleeps in the distortion world. Giratina's patience is not infinite. Your existence is a stone in its shoe, and it will act to remove it." He placed a hand on Ash's shoulder. "You cannot stay here. This island is no longer a sanctuary for you, it is a known location. You must keep moving. But you go now not as a boy struggling with a curse, but as a guardian in your own right. A guardian of a power that can preserve or shatter, all depending on the choices you make." He then looked at both Ash and Dawn. "Your bond is the key. As long as you have each other, you have balance. Never forget that." As they prepared to leave, taking the same boat they arrived in, now repaired and fortified by Riley's strange, gentle power, the Aura Guardian gave them one last gift. It was an ancient, leather-bound map, far older and more detailed than their own. "There are other places of power in this world," Riley said, pointing to a location deep in the mountains of central Sinnoh. "Sanctuaries. Places where the veil between worlds is thin. You may find allies there. Or you may find greater dangers. Your path is your own to walk." They thanked him, their farewell solemn but full of gratitude. As they sailed away from Iron Island, the storm that had perpetually shrouded it finally broke. For the first time, rays of sunlight touched the rust-colored peaks. The island seemed to be bidding them a peaceful farewell. Ash stood at the helm, his hand resting on the wheel, Dawn at his side. The sea was calm. The future was more dangerous than ever, but for the first time, they were not just reacting to it. They were ready to face it. They were in control. Their gazes met, a silent promise passing between them. They were two as one, and they were ready for whatever came next. Chapter 5. The world turned sideways. The calm did not last. For a week, they had sailed south through placid seas, the sun warm on their faces, the ghost of Iron Island storm a distant memory. The harmony Ash had found within himself, anchored by Dawn, held true. The power no longer felt like a raging torrent threatening to break its banks, but a deep, powerful river flowing steadily within him. He could dip into it, subtly bending probability to find favorable currents, warping space to shorten the vast distances of the open ocean into manageable journeys. They moved with an unnatural speed, the shores of Sinnoh appearing on the horizon far sooner than any map would suggest. They made landfall in a secluded cove near Sunnyshore's city, abandoning their small boat and melting back into the familiar wilderness. Their destination, marked on Riley's ancient map, was Lake Verity. It was a place of deep emotional and psychic energy, home to Mesprit, the being of emotion. Riley had suggested it was a place where they might find a deeper understanding of the spiritual component of Ash's power. But as they drew closer, a sense of wrongness began to permeate the air. It was a feeling Ash knew intimately, the same subtle tearing at the edges of reality that had haunted the back alleys of Jubilife. Here, though, it was 100 times stronger. The whispers were no longer at the edge of his hearing, they were a constant, disorienting murmur. "Do you feel that?" Dawn asked, her hand tightening on his arm. Even without his powers, she could sense it through their bond, a deep, resonant dread that seemed to emanate from the direction of the lake. The hum of their connection, usually so comforting, now had a discordant, anxious undertone. The birds in the forest were silent. The air was unnaturally still, heavy and oppressive, like the moment before a lightning strike. As they crested the final hill overlooking the lake, they saw why. The sky above Lake Verity was broken. It was not the violent, colorful vortex of the spear pillar. This was more insidious, more terrifying. A vast, circular section of the sky, miles in diameter, was gone. In its place was a shimmering, gelatinous membrane of sickly purple and gray, through which they could see a distorted, nightmarish landscape. Jagged, floating islands of rock drifted lazily. Impossible trees grew downwards from unseen ceilings. The physics were a fever dream. It was the distortion world, bleeding into their own. But it wasn't just bleeding through. It was pulling. The water of Lake Verity, usually a pristine, mirror-like blue, was being drawn upwards in a massive, silent waterspout, not of water, but of pure space. The lake was being siphoned, molecule by molecule, into the alien dimension above. The trees at the water's edge were stretched and elongated, their leaves and branches being peeled away into the vortex. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to be vibrating, straining towards the rift. Giratina, Ash breathed, the name a curse. The whispers in his mind coalesced into a single, booming thought that was not his own. A thought of pure, cold fury. The flaw. The anomaly. The wound on reality. It must be excised. Giratina wasn't just waiting for him to slip anymore. It had grown impatient. It was ripping open the world to get to him, and it had chosen a place of immense power to do it. "It's using the lake's energy to anchor the portal," Ash said, his mind racing, the calm of Iron Island shattered by the sheer scale of the threat. His temporal sense was screaming, showing him a dozen horrific futures, the lake vanishing completely, the portal expanding, the town of Twinleaf just over the hill being peeled off the face of the planet. "We have to warn someone," Dawn cried, pulling out her Poketch. "Cynthia. We have to call Cynthia." She tried, but the screen was just static. A high-pitched whine emanated from the device. There's no signal. The distortion, it's scrambling all communications. They were alone. There was no champion to call, no Aura Guardian to aid them. There was only the two of them, standing on a hill, watching the world end in slow motion. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm them. But then, Ash looked at Dawn. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw the same unwavering resolve she'd had in Riley's cave. She was his anchor. And he was her shield. A new, terrifying clarity settled over him. They couldn't run from this. They couldn't fight it from the outside. The problem wasn't the portal. The portal was just a symptom. The problem was Giratina's focus on him. "We have to go in," he said, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear him over the low hum of the portal. Dawn stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. In there? Ash, it will kill us. It's going to kill everything if we don't stop it, he countered, his gaze locked on the churning vortex. This is happening because of me. Giratina wants me. As long as I'm out here, it will keep ripping holes in the world to get to me. But if I go to it, I can draw its focus. I can get it to close the portal. It was the most insane, reckless plan he had ever conceived. It was a leap of faith into the heart of madness. It was suicide. But as he looked at the disintegrating shoreline, at the silent, inexorable destruction, he knew it was the only way. He turned to her, his face grim but his eyes full of a desperate, unwavering trust. "I can't do it alone, Dawn. I need my anchor." She looked from his face to the horrifying vista in the sky, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to drag him away, to hide. But she remembered Riley's words, "Your bond is the key." She remembered the feeling of pulling him back from the brink, the strength they had found together. He wasn't asking her to follow him into oblivion. He was asking her to be his partner, to face the impossible with him, as they had sworn to do. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of ozone and dust. "Okay," she whispered, the word a tiny speck of defiance against the silent apocalypse. "Okay. Together." He gave her a grim, grateful nod. He released his most trusted partners. Pikachu was already on his shoulder, its body tense, cheeks sparking with a mixture of fear and ferocious loyalty. Infernape, Staraptor, and Baizel emerged, their cries muted by the oppressive atmosphere, but their stances ready. Dawn did the same. Piplup, Buniri, Pachirisu, Mamoswine. Her team. Her family. They stood beside her, a small, brave bastion against a cosmic nightmare. "Hold on to me," Ash said, his voice tight. "And don't let go. No matter what." She grabbed his hand, her grip like a vice. Their connection flared, a beacon of warmth and shared resolve. He focused his will, not on the world around them, but on the bond between them, encasing them in a thin, shimmering bubble of stabilized spacetime. It was a desperate, flimsy shield against the chaos they were about to enter. Then, with a shared look of terror and determination, they ran. They sprinted down the hill, not away from the disaster, but straight towards the colossal waterspout at the center of the lake. They hit the water's edge, and without hesitating, they leaped. The moment they entered the vortex, the world dissolved. It was not like falling or flying. It was like being dismantled. Sound ceased to exist. Light became a viscous fluid of sickening colors. The sensation of up and down vanished. Ash held on to their protective bubble with every ounce of his will, the only thing keeping them from being shredded into a stream of stray atoms. Their Pokémon, caught within the bubble, cried out in confusion and terror. They were dragged upwards, through the membrane, and then they were spat out, unceremoniously, into the distortion world. They landed hard on a floating slab of gray, crystalline rock. The impact knocked the wind out of them, but their bubble had held. They were alive. They were whole. They staggered to their feet, looking around in stunned silence. The place was a physical manifestation of a migraine. The ground they stood on was a small, floating island in a vast, empty expanse of murky gray. Far above and below them, other islands drifted on unseen currents. Gravity was a suggestion, not a law. A waterfall of green liquid flowed sideways from one floating rock to another. The sky, if it could be called that, was a swirling miasma of purple and black. There was no sun, no source of light, yet everything was cast in a dim, uniform twilight. The air was thin and cold, and tasted of static electricity. And it was not empty. From the shadows of the floating islands, things began to emerge. They were not Pokemon. They were concepts. Geometric shapes that moved with a predatory grace. Shifting masses of shadow with too many eyes. They were Giratina's antibodies, the dimension's natural defense system, and they were all turning their silent, malevolent attention towards the foreign invaders. Stay close, Ash gritted out, his body thrumming with defensive energy. Infernape, Flare Blitz. Staraptor, Brave Bird. Keep them back. The battle was immediate and disorienting. Ash's Pokemon fought with a desperate ferocity, but their attacks behaved strangely here. Infernape's flames seemed to get tangled in the air, unspooling like fiery ribbons. Staraptor's flight path kept getting twisted, forcing it to recalibrate mid-attack. Dawn's team was their rock. Her Pokemon's moves, less about raw power and more about control and effect, were surprisingly potent here. Buniri's ice beam created solid, predictable surfaces for them to fight on. Mamoswine's sheer bulk was a reliable anchor, its ancient power sending ripples of stable energy through the chaotic dimension. Pachirisu's Super Fong, which dealt damage based on a percentage of the opponent's health, was brutally effective against the strange, formless thralls. They fought their way from one floating island to the next, leaping across terrifying chasms of nothingness. Ash used his spatial awareness to create temporary bridges of hardened air, a trick that left him dizzy and nauseous. It was a desperate, nightmarish journey through a landscape designed by a mad god. Their goal was the source of the portal. They could feel it, a deep, resonant wound in the fabric of this dimension, the place where Giratina was focusing its power. It was a beacon in the madness. After what felt like an eternity of fighting and leaping, they arrived. They stood on the edge of a vast, bowl-shaped crater, and at its center, hovering in the air, was the portal. It looked like a shimmering, upside-down whirlpool, and through it, they could see a distorted, fish-eye view of Lake Verity, still being drained. And there, guarding it, was Giratina. It was more massive, more terrifying than any legend had described. Its colossal, serpentine body, adorned with golden, rib-like appendages, floated with an eerie, silent grace. Its 6 shadowy, spectral wings beat without stirring the air. Its red eyes, burning with cold, ancient intelligence, fixed on them. It had been waiting. The moment its gaze fell upon them, a voice filled their minds. It was not a voice of words, but of pure, conceptual meaning. It was a feeling of crushing pressure, of absolute, cosmic authority. Flaw, abomination, a mortal soul infected with the power of the whole. You are a cancer on the cloth of what is, the sheer force of. Its psychic voice brought them to their knees. Ash's Pokemon whimpered, their will to fight draining away. Ash gritted his teeth, pushing himself back to his feet, shielding his mind with the force of his own will. We're not here to fight you, he projected back, his own thoughts a desperate shout against a hurricane. Close the portal. You're destroying my world. Giratina's form seemed to flicker, to pulse with a dark, amused energy. Your world is flawed. It is built on the chaos of emotion. Of spirit. It is a failed creation. I am its guardian. Its corrector. You, anomaly, are its greatest flaw. Your very existence unravels the order I protect. The order you protect is just emptiness. Dawn shot back, her own mind, linked to Ash's, finding a voice. She stood up, her fear eclipsed by a sudden, righteous anger. A world without spirit, without emotion. That's not order, it's death. It's the same empty world Cyrus wanted. Giratina's attention shifted to her, its red eyes narrowing. The pressure intensified. The vermin sympathizes with the disease, she's not vermin. Ash roared, stepping in front of Dawn, his body flaring with a protective aura of blue and pink light. She's my anchor. And we are not a disease. He knew then that there would be no negotiation. There would be no reasoning. Giratina saw him as a bug in the code of reality, and its only goal was to press delete. Your power is a stolen echo of my brother's. I will reclaim it. I will unmake you and restore the balance. Giratina moved. It didn't fly, it simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. It was now directly in front of them, its massive head blotting out the dim light. It opened its mouth, and a vortex of purple, ghostly energy began to form, its signature move, Shadow Force. It was an attack that struck from another dimension, an attack that was impossible to dodge. There was no time for a plan. No time for strategy. Ash reacted on pure, primal instinct. He grabbed Dawn, pulling her into a tight embrace, turning his back to the attack. He poured every last drop of his energy, the balanced harmony he had found on Iron Island, into a single, desperate act of preservation. He didn't create a shield. He wrapped the very fabric of space-time around them, folding it into an impenetrable, multi-layered shell. The shadow force hit. The impact was absolute silence. The world outside their tiny bubble of reality ceased to exist. They were hit by a wave of pure, conceptual nothingness. But Ash's shield held. It buckled, it cracked, it strained to the point of breaking, but the harmony of time and space, anchored by the raw, emotional power of his bond with Dawn, refused to shatter. When the attack subsided, their shield dissolved. Ash fell to one knee, the world spinning, blood trickling from his nose. The effort had nearly broken him. Giratina hovered before them, its red eyes wide with something that looked almost like surprise. It had struck them with the force of oblivion, and they were still there. Impossible. The fusion. It is. Stable. It was in that moment of hesitation, that flicker of disbelief, that Dawn saw their only chance. It wasn't about overpowering Giratina. It was about disrupting its focus. Ash, she yelled, her voice hoarse. The portal. We can't beat it, but we can break its anchor. He looked at her, then at the massive, swirling vortex behind Giratina. She was right. It was a fool's errand to fight a god in its own dimension. But the portal was a piece of their world, a wound that could be healed. A new plan, born of shared desperation, flashed between them. Infernape, Pikachu, Bizel, with me. Ash commanded, staggering to his feet. Full power. Aim for the center of the vortex. Mamoswine, Buniri, Pachirisu. Dawn directed. Cover them. Ice Beam, Super Fawn. Buy them time. It was a final, desperate charge. Dawn's Pokémon threw themselves at the colossal deity, a brave, suicidal distraction. Mamoswine's ancient power slammed into Giratina's side, making it recoil more in annoyance than pain. Buniri's ice beam coated its spectral wings in a thin layer of frost that it shook off instantly. But it was enough. It drew Giratina's attention for the precious seconds Ash needed. He and his 3 Pokémon unleashed everything they had. Infernape's most powerful Flare Blitz. Pikachu's greatest Thunderbolt. Bizel's strongest Aqua Jet. But Ash didn't just let them attack. He used his own power to augment them. He wrapped Infernape's flames in a layer of compressed space, making them burn hotter and strike with a physical, concussive force. He guided Pikachu's lightning along a warped temporal path, making it strike the same point 100 times in a single instant. He infused Bizel's water with a chaotic spatial energy, turning the Aqua Jet into a drill that tore at the fabric of the portal. The three attacks, fused with the power of a god, slammed into the heart of the vortex. The distortion world screamed. The portal, already unstable, could not handle this new, paradoxical energy. It buckled, it tore, and it collapsed in on itself with a deafening implosion of light and sound. The backlash was catastrophic. A shockwave of pure dimensional energy erupted from the collapsing rift, throwing everything and everyone backwards. Giratina roared in fury and pain as the energy wave washed over it, its form flickering violently. Ash and Dawn and all their Pokémon were caught in the blast. Their world turned white. They felt a sensation of being violently, brutally ejected, like a splinter being squeezed from a wound. They awoke coughing and sputtering, lying in the mud on the shores of Lake Verity. The sky above them was a perfect, unbroken blue. The waters of the lake were calm, settling back into their basin. The silence was absolute. They had done it. They had survived. Every muscle in Ash's body screamed in protest. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean. Dawn was lying beside him, equally battered, but she was alive. Their Pokémon were scattered around them, groaning and stirring, but all accounted for. They had won. But as Ash lay there, his cheek pressed against the cool, damp earth, he felt a final, parting message from the being they had just faced. It wasn't a roar of fury this time. It was a cold, chilling promise that resonated in the deepest part of his soul. This is not over. The wound remains. I will not rest until it is cleansed. The immediate threat was gone, but the war was far from over. They had survived a direct confrontation with a god, but they had also proven, beyond any doubt, that his existence was an intolerable imbalance. Giratina would be back. And next time, it would not be a matter of closing a portal. It would be a battle for the fate of reality itself. Ash pushed himself into a sitting position, his body aching with a bone-deep weariness. He looked at Dawn, who was now sitting up as well, her face smudged with dirt, her hair a mess, but her eyes shining with a fierce, unbelievable light. They had walked into hell together, and they had walked back out. She crawled over to him, collapsing against his side, her body trembling with the aftershock of it all. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her tight. They didn't speak. There were no words for what they had just endured. There was only the shared, ragged breaths, the feeling of solid ground beneath them, and the quiet, unbreakable certainty of the bond that had just saved the world. They were battered, they were exhausted, and they were still hunted. But they were together. And for now, that was everything. Chapter 6, The Dragon's Council. The return to civilization was a jarring, discordant shock. After the profound, terrifying silence of the distortion world, the everyday sounds of Twin Leaf Town, a mother calling for her child, the distant chime of a bicycle bell, the rustle of leaves in a manicured garden, felt alien and impossibly precious. They looked like specters, their clothes torn and caked with the mud of Lake Verity's shore, their faces etched with a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. They had staggered into town under the cover of a mercifully overcast sky, avoiding the main paths, the fear of being recognized a cold knot in their stomachs. The battle at the lake had been a secret apocalypse, the world had been saved, and it didn't even know it had been in danger. There were no news reports, no Aegis patrols. Just a lingering, oppressive quiet and the chilling promise of Giratina's return. That promise was the reason for their next, desperate gamble. Hiding was no longer an option. Fleeing was pointless. Giratina wasn't hunting a location, it was hunting Ash. And Aegis, under the command of the relentless Valerius, was a bloodhound that would never give up the trail. They were caught between a force that wanted to erase Ash from existence and one that wanted to lock him in a cage. "We can't fight them both," Ash said, his voice a low, rough murmur. They were huddled in the shadow of the Twin Leaf Pokémon Lab, a place of nostalgic, painful memories. Not alone. So what do we do? Dawn asked, her gaze fixed on the familiar path that led to her own front door, a path she couldn't take. The ache of being so close to home, yet so far away, was a physical pain. We stop running, Ash replied, his eyes taking on the hard, decisive glint she had come to associate with his most impossible plans. We build an army. It wasn't a choice born of arrogance, but of grim necessity. Riley's map had shown them other sanctuaries, other potential allies, but they were scattered, isolated. To have any chance of surviving what was coming, they needed a centralized, powerful force on their side. They needed legitimacy. They needed power that Aegis couldn't simply dismiss or overpower. They needed the one person in Sinnoh who commanded more respect and authority than anyone else. Cynthia, Dawn breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. She helped us once, Ash said, nodding. She gave us a head start. But she doesn't know the whole truth. She doesn't know about Aegis, or Valerius, or what's really happening with Giratina. We have to make her understand. We have to make her an ally. It was a monumental risk. They would be willingly walking back into the system they had fled, placing their trust in a figure who was, ultimately, an agent of the established order. But as Ash felt the faint, residual chill of the distortion world clinging to his soul, he knew it was the only move they had left. Getting a message to the champion of the Sinnoh region without being immediately apprehended was a challenge in itself. They couldn't use public phones or terminals, Aegis would be monitoring everything. They needed a secure channel, a ghost in the machine. They found it in the unlikeliest of places. They traveled to Hearthome City, home of the Super Contest Hall, a place where Dawn had once shone so brightly. She knew the city's back channels, the networks of contest-obsessed fans and coordinators who traded information like currency. Using a series of coded messages posted on an obscure fan forum under her old screen name, Didi, she managed to make contact with a name she remembered, Fantina, the Hearthome gym leader. Fantina was not just a gym leader, she was a celebrity, a performer, a woman who understood the power of secrets and spectacle. The message Dawn sent was simple and cryptic: the stars of the Jubilife show request an audience. The encore is about to begin, and the stage is the whole of Sinnoh. We need a director. 2 days later, a reply appeared. A single word, Celestic. Celestic Town. The ancient heart of Sinnoh, home to the region's oldest historical center and overseen by Cynthia's own grandmother. It was a neutral, sacred ground. It was an invitation. They arrived in the dead of night, moving through the quiet, historic town like wraiths. The meeting was not in the famous research center, but in a small, private residence on the town's outskirts, a traditional house with paper walls and a serene rock garden. The door slid open before they could knock. Fantina stood there, her extravagant purple dress and elaborate hairstyle a stark contrast to the simple surroundings. Her expression, usually so theatrical, was deadly serious. "Bienvenue," she whispered, ushering them inside. "You have made quite the stir, you two. The performance at the port, magnifique. But it has made you very powerful enemies." She led them into a large, central room. A low table was surrounded by cushions. And sitting at the table, her expression as unreadable as ever, was Cynthia. Her Garchomp stood impassively in the corner, a living statue of immense power. "Dawn." "Ash," Cynthia said, her voice calm, but with an undercurrent of profound gravity. She gestured to the empty cushions opposite her. "Please. Sit. Fantina has told me you have a story to tell. I suggest you begin." Ash and Dawn sat. The air was thick with tension. This was it. The moment where their fate would be decided. Ash took the lead. He didn't make excuses or pleas. He stated facts. He started with the battle against Paul in Veilstone, the first appearance of the gray-suited soldiers. He described their technology, their coordination, their ruthlessness. He recounted the trap at Jubilife Port, explaining how Phantom had set them up and how they had discovered the smugglers were in Aegis front. He laid out the evidence Dawn had uncovered, the shell corporations, the connection to the Devon Corporation, the mission to capture, not trade, rare Pokémon for research. As he spoke, he let the power within him bleed through just enough for them to feel it. He didn't make his eyes glow or warp the air. He simply let the density of his presence, the quiet hum of contained time and space, fill the room. It was a subtle, undeniable demonstration. Then, he told them about Commander Valerius. He described the man's intelligence, his determination, and the instantaneous teleportation escape from Iron Island. Cynthia listened, her fingers steepled, her expression unchanging, but Fantina gasped when Ash described the flash of light. Mon Dieu, Fantina breathed. Technology that mimics Aubra's teleport. That is, beyond anything publicly known. Finally, Ash spoke of the true, existential threat. He described the whispers, the fraying of reality, and the horrific scene at Lake Verity. He didn't try to explain the physics of the distortion world, he described the feeling of it, the wrongness, the way it tried to unmake them. He told them of Giratina's motive, the perception of him as a flaw in reality, a cancer to be excised. When he finished, a heavy silence descended on the room. Cynthia hadn't moved a muscle, but her eyes, usually so calm and analytical, were dark with the weight of what she had heard. Aegis, she said. The name a cold, hard thing on her tongue. I have heard whispers. A Black Ops International coalition, founded after the events in Hoenn with Groudon and Kyogre. Their mandate is to neutralize alpha-level threats outside the purview of regional Pokémon leagues. They answer to no one. I had believed them to be a myth, a conspiracy theory. She looked at Ash. But they believe you are such a threat. They're not entirely wrong, Ash admitted, his voice grim. The power I have, it's not natural. But I'm not a weapon. And I'm not a threat to my world. But Aegis and Giratina, they are. Dawn spoke then, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension. Cynthia, we didn't come here to ask you to hide us. We came to ask you to fight with us. Aegis is operating illegally in your region, threatening your citizens and Pokémon. Giratina is threatening the entire world because of a cosmic grudge. You are the champion. This is your responsibility, too. The challenge hung in the air. It was a bold, almost reckless move, but it was born of desperation and a newfound confidence. Cynthia was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. You are asking me to declare war on a shadow organization that may have the backing of multiple world governments. You are asking me to prepare for a battle against a legendary Pokémon, a member of the creation trio itself. She looked at them, a flicker of something, awe, perhaps, or fear, in her eyes. The sheer audacity of it is breathtaking. Fantina, who had been listening with rapt attention, stood up, her bracelets jangling softly. Audacity is what creates legends, Sherry, she said, her voice a dramatic whisper. She looked at Cynthia. I have seen this Aegis. I have seen their agents sniffing around my city. They move with an arrogance that suggests they do not respect our laws or our power. And a world without spirit, as this Giratina wishes? It would be a world without art, without passion, without contests. She shuddered theatrically. It is a world I will not live in. The Heart Home Gym stands with them. Fantina's declaration broke the tension. Cynthia looked from the gym leader's passionate face to the two determined teenagers in front of her. She saw the truth in their story, saw the terrifying logic of their conclusions. To ignore them would be to abdicate her duty as champion. She finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. We will not be their prey any longer. We will become the hunters. She stood up, her presence seeming to fill the room. But the two of you, and Fantina's ghosts, are not enough. If we are to fight a war on two fronts, we need Sinnoh's strongest. What followed was a whirlwind of covert activity. Cynthia, using her authority as champion, convened a secret council. Not in a public forum, but in scattered, clandestine meetings across the region. She brought in only those she knew she could trust implicitly, those whose strength was matched by their character. Faulkner, the Sunnyshore's gym leader, was summoned from his lethargic depression by a challenge he couldn't ignore. He met them in the dead of night at the Vista Lighthouse, the beam shut down for the first time in years. He listened to Ash's story, his usual boredom replaced by a crackling, electric intensity. A force that uses technology to rival Pokémon. An enemy I can finally unleash my full power against without holding back. A dangerous, eager smile spread across his face. Count me in. Flint of the Elite Four, Faulkner's fiery-haired friend, was brought in next. His loyalty to Faulkner was absolute, his passion for battle even greater. When he heard the stakes, he slammed his fist into his palm, a wide grin on his face. A secret war for the fate of the world. This is gonna be a blast. Cynthia even extended an invitation to a name that made Ash and Dawn balk, Paul. He knows too much, Cynthia argued, her logic irrefutable. He saw your power firsthand, Ash. He was targeted by Aegis. Right now, he is a loose end. We can either make him an ally or risk him becoming a liability. The meeting took place on a rain-swept pier in Canalave City. Paul arrived alone, his posture as rigid and defiant as ever. He listened to Ash's full explanation without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on Ash, processing, analyzing. The contempt he'd shown in Veilstone was gone, replaced by a cold, grudging respect. When Ash was finished, Paul was silent for a long time. So the power you have, it's not something you earn through training, he said, the statement a confirmation of his own theories. It was an accident. It was, Ash admitted. And these Aegis soldiers, they hunt you because they see that power as a threat to be controlled, Paul continued, his voice flat. That's right, Dawn said. Paul scoffed, a short, bitter sound. Idiots. Power isn't a threat. The weakness of the one who wields it is the threat. He looked at Ash, a strange, complex expression on his face. In Veilstone, you were different. You were precise. Controlled. You fought like I always knew you could if you weren't held back by your sentimentality. He crossed his arms. I don't care about saving the world. And I don't care about your little rebellion. But this Aegis, they believe that strength should be neutered and caged. That is an ideology I cannot accept. He met Cynthia's gaze. I'm in. But I fight my own way. With Paul's reluctant allegiance, the council was formed. A small, elite cadre of Sinnoh's most powerful trainers, united by a secret that could tear the region apart. Their base of operations needed to be secure, hidden, and symbolically significant. The choice was obvious. The Spear Pillar. The site of Ash's transformation, a place with a natural thinning of dimensional barriers, was the perfect fortress. Under the guise of a long-term archaeological restoration project, Cynthia's contacts in the Pokémon League cordoned off the entire peak of Mount Coronet, establishing a perimeter that no civilian could cross. Inside this protected zone, they built their war room. Faulkner and his Raichu worked around the clock, setting up a secure, off-grid communications network and a sensor array that could detect dimensional fraying. Flint and his Infernape cleared rubble, their fiery passion turned to constructive purpose. Fantina used her Driftbloom to ferry supplies under the cover of darkness. Paul, ever the pragmatist, scouted the mountain's defenses, pointing out tactical weaknesses with a brutal, critical eye. In the center of it all stood Ash and Dawn. They were no longer just fugitives. They were the heart of this alliance. Ash, using the harmony he'd found on Iron Island, trained with the others, pushing them to new heights. He didn't use his powers to defeat them, but to challenge them. He would slow time just enough to force Faulkner to react faster, to anticipate. He would warp space to create impossible angles of attack for Flint's Infernape to overcome. He was making them all stronger. Dawn, meanwhile, had become the group's strategist and emotional core. Her coordinator's mind, used to planning intricate appeals and combinations, was perfectly suited to weaving together the disparate fighting styles of the council members. She saw synergies they missed, plotting combination attacks between Fantina's ghosts and Paul's raw power, between Faulkner's electric fields and Flint's firestorms. She was the one who kept the clashing personalities of the group, especially Flint and Paul, from boiling over, her calm, confident presence a soothing balm on their egos. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the restored pillar, Ash found Paul staring at the spot where the red chain had shattered. "You still haven't explained it," Paul said without turning around. "The moment in our battle. When you dodged Electivire's thunder. It wasn't speed. The world, it stopped." Ash walked over and stood beside him. "I froze time," he said simply. There were no more secrets. Paul was silent for a moment. "Can you teach me?" he asked, the question so uncharacteristic, so vulnerable, that it stunned Ash. "Teach you to freeze time?" Ash asked. "No," Paul said, finally turning to look at him. "Teach me how you did it. How you had that much power at your fingertips and chose to only use a fraction of it. How you won by making your Pokémon stronger, instead of just winning." In that moment, Ash saw the profound shift in his oldest, fiercest rival. Paul wasn't asking for power. He was asking for an understanding of control. Of strength tempered by wisdom. It was a bigger victory than any Pokémon battle. Their fragile alliance was solidifying. But as they prepared, so did their enemies. Faulkner's sensors began to pick up disturbing readings. Faint, encrypted Aegis communications, bouncing off satellites, all converging on a single, black site facility deep in the icy wastes of the northern tundra. And more disturbingly, the dimensional fraying was increasing in frequency and magnitude, no longer random but focused, as if something was actively probing the walls of reality, searching for a weak point. The calm before the storm was ending. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place late one night. Dawn was in the makeshift command center, cross-referencing Aegis black site locations with geological surveys of Sinnoh. Suddenly, her eyes widened. "Ash. Cynthia. Get in here," she called, her voice sharp with urgency. They rushed in, gathering around her terminal. She pointed to a map of the northern tundra. "The Aegis facility," she said, her finger tracing a circle around a remote location. "It's located in the same mountain range as the Snow Point Temple." Cynthia's blood ran cold. "The home of Regigigas. They're not just researching rare Pokémon," Ash said, the horrifying implication dawning on him. "They're trying to capture and control the legendary Titans. And what's worse," Dawn added, pulling up another file, a satellite image from that afternoon. "Look." The image showed the spear pillar. But high above, almost invisible in the stratosphere, was a tiny, black speck. A high-altitude drone. "They found us," Cynthia whispered, her voice grim. As if on cue, an alarm blared through the command center. Faulkner stumbled in, his face pale. "Massive energy buildup detected," he yelled. "It's Aegis. A fleet of them, teleporting in. They're initiating a full-scale assault." He looked at another monitor, his eyes widening in horror. "And that's not all. The dimensional sensors are going insane. There's a massive rift opening. Right above us." On the main screen, a live feed from an external camera showed the sky above the spear pillar beginning to fracture, the familiar, sickly purple of the distortion world bleeding through. Giratina had found them. And Valerius, believing Ash was building an army to challenge the world, had launched a preemptive strike, bringing his full force to bear. Their two greatest enemies had arrived. At the same time. At the same place. The Dragon's Council stood together on the spear pillar, the wind whipping around them, the air crackling with the energy of two impending apocalypses. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a war on two fronts. But they were not afraid. They were ready. They were Sinnoh's finest. And they would not let their world fall. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.